Chapter 1328. What's wrong? More than 200,000 enemies aren't enough for the Black Cavalry. Just wait and see. We'll go wherever there's danger. Yang Chendong chuckled. He liked Beta Persei's optimistic personality and fearless courage. Hearing that the Black Cavalry could go to the battlefield, Beta Persei immediately laughed. Okay, young master, then I'll tell my brothers the news now. I guarantee that they'll all be overjoyed. First City. The military report of 80,000 Baiming infantry leaving Terror City was also sent to Tiger's man via telegram. He first laughed, then looked at the Logistics Command Commander Yang Si, Castellan Yu Mian, Division Commander Xiao Yining of the 5th Division Lu, and 3 other commanders and a division commander in the conference room. He said in a deep voice, "It's time for our new army group and First City to stretch our hands. Now announce the order." After everyone, including Yu Mian, stood up straight, Tiger's man said, "The 101st Division and the Heavy Cavalry Regiment will go out of the city to find the Baiming Liaodong Cavalry and cooperate with the 1st Cavalry Division to find and destroy the enemy. The 102nd Division and the 103rd Division will surround the Baiming army outside the city from the left and right respectively and strive to capture all of them. The 5th Division Lu will cover the Baiming army's artillery camp before the battle and go out of the city to severely damage the enemy's firearms camp. Let them know that we're their ancestors when it comes to firearms. The Logistics Command will be responsible for going out of the city to take care of the prisoners and clean up the battlefield. The Castellan's mansion will be responsible for defending the city and security in the city. At the same time, empty several hospitals in the city and prepare to receive the enemy's wounded." After issuing several orders in a row, Tiger's man suddenly raised his voice and said, "The 6th young master will be watching this battle not far away. Whoever has a problem should prepare to leave the army and go back to retire. We promise to complete the mission." Everyone answered in unison. As the 5-star army continued to grow stronger, the number of reserve talents also increased. Who knew how many people were eyeing the position below their buttocks? If he didn't perform well, Tiger's mane wasn't joking. He would really retire early. This was related to his own future, so he couldn't afford to be careless. Tiger's mane knew that his words had worked when he saw the solemn expressions on everyone's faces. He nodded quietly and then said, "Okay, go and prepare. Rest well tonight. Tomorrow morning, we will go out and fight." Saihan Mountain. This was an important mountain between the First City and Tulu City. As a link between the two cities, it served as a buffer. Saihan Mountain, which had experienced countless wars, had changed hands many times. It was used as the gate of the First City to defend against enemies. This time was no exception. Baiming's first target was this place. However, because the 5-star army was prepared and gave up in advance, it allowed Baiming's army to take down this important place without shedding any blood. However, because it was too easy to get, it didn't attract enough attention. Even Li Keguang and Ho Xianxia, who were the vanguard generals, didn't leave any troops here. However, when Gao Yu passed by here, she casually pointed and arranged for 3,000 soldiers to be here. Most of these 3,000 soldiers were made up of new recruits. Many people were happy to be arranged here. Originally, they joined the army for food and pay. In the eyes of such people, there was no such thing as loyalty to the country. The facts also proved that after they changed from ordinary people to members of the Baiming army, their lives didn't change much. The salary wasn't distributed in time, and they were usually only 60% full after eating. This made them complain a lot. This time, when they heard that they were going to fight against the awe-inspiring Bugnam of Gojoseon and the powerful 5-star army, many soldiers were scared before the battle. They just wanted to eat food and didn't have any great ambitions. There was no one above them, and even if they made military achievements, most of them would be taken away, and their future was bleak. They just wanted to live and become soldiers. It was too difficult for such people to show their heroic side on the battlefield. Fortunately, these 3,000 soldiers were lucky. They didn't need to go to the front line. They only needed to guard the mountain and watch the Baiming army's supplies pass smoothly. This made the 3,000 soldiers very happy. They didn't need to fight and they might be able to get military achievements. This was really a blessing from the heavens. For this reason, the 3,000 soldiers had a good celebration. Then, the next day, they began to guard the mountain and muddle along. They were muddling along because they had nothing to do from morning to night. Apart from occasionally seeing the Baiming supply vehicles, they didn't see anyone else. As for the 5-star army, they didn't even see a shadow. After a few days, the initial nervousness had disappeared. Now, when the sky had just turned dark, apart from 200 soldiers who were normally on duty, the rest of the 3,000 soldiers had entered the temporary military tent and started to talk with Zhou Gong. In the pitch-black night, 50 well-trained scouts with sharp blades in their mouths approached quickly under the cover of the trees. They were like agile monkeys, flashing and moving behind the Baiming army soldiers. As they continued to move, the Baiming army soldiers were either killed or knocked unconscious. In just 15 minutes, the 200 night watch soldiers had lost all signs of life. When Mo Benyi, the commander of the 306th Division of the Army, saw this scene, he couldn't help but shake his head. New recruits are new recruits. There's no challenge at all. They didn't even send out hidden sentries. Alright, everyone go up. Don't make any noise. Get ready to capture the prisoners. The 3,000 Baiming army soldiers who didn't have the slightest bit of vigilance and never thought that someone would attack them had large swords pressed against their necks while they were still sleeping in their tents. The entire operation was methodical and orderly. In this battle, other than the 123 Baiming army soldiers who were killed at the beginning, the rest, including the general, were all captured. No one resisted, and this Baiming army was completely wiped out. Send a message to the military commander. Tell him that we've taken down Mount Saihan, Mo Benyi instructed the radio operator sent by the military. With his rank, he wasn't qualified to be on the radio. If he hadn't come out alone to complete the mission, he wouldn't have been able to enjoy such treatment. As they didn't make any noise, the Baiming army didn't know that Mount Saihan had changed hands. It wasn't until the afternoon of the second day that the 80,000 reinforcements from Toulouse city passed by this place that they realized the danger ahead was imminent. These rocks were placed by the 306th Division soldiers overnight and half a day. Of course, the 3,000 Baiming captives also contributed a lot. As the huge rocks rolled down one after another, the 5-star army's full-scale counterattack began. As Mo Benyi's side began to take action, the 5-star army in beginning city also began their counterattack. The Lu 5th Division in the city had already locked onto the Baiming army's firearms camp outside the city. After the order was given, cannonballs were shot out from within the city. After a few consecutive shots, explosions sounded one after another. The resulting explosions formed a sea of fire, alarming the 100,000 Baiming infantrymen below the city. What's going on? Gao Yu, who heard the explosions, rushed out of the main tent. His face was filled with panic and anger. However, his anger quickly turned into fear. One after another, scouts appeared in front of him as if they had agreed to meet. Reporting to the military supervisor, the 5-star army's cannons hit our firearms camp's cannons. Now, all the cannons have exploded and the cannonballs have also been detonated. The firearms camp has lost the ability to fight and suffered heavy losses. Reporting to the military supervisor, the 5-star army opened the inner city gate and rushed out. They have long-range, high-speed firearms. Our brothers guarding the outer city gate couldn't hold them off and have already retreated. We're requesting for backup. Reporting to the military supervisor, countless cavalrymen rushed out of the beginning city. They're coming towards us from both sides. We're requesting for backup. Reporting to the military supervisor, listening to the bad news one after another, Gao Yu's face turned red because of anger. Suddenly, he shouted, "Okay, stop talking, stop talking. Immediately organize people to hold on for me. Also, send someone to inform the 80,000 reinforcements. Tell them to speed up and come to join us under the beginning city. Also, send someone to look for General Fang Dingshan and request for cavalry support. Reinforcements." At this moment, Gao Yu already knew that the 5-star army had started their counterattack. Moreover, it was an unexpectedly strong counterattack. From the looks of it, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. What he needed to do now was to request for reinforcements. As long as he could hold on until the reinforcements appeared, he could coordinate with them from the inside and outside and turn the tables around. How would Gao Yu know that the 80,000 infantry reinforcements he hoped for were blocked at the foot of Saihan Mountain? They couldn't move forward. And right behind them, Commander Wu Hui of the 3rd Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army was leading his cavalrymen all the way here. They had taken Baiming's army by surprise and inflicted heavy losses. According to Yang Chendong's battle plan, the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army stayed at the foot of Tulu City to prevent them from providing reinforcements again. The 3rd Cavalry Division and the 305th Cavalry Division of the 2nd Army would cut through the back and flank of the 80,000 Baiming's reinforcements. They no longer had the ability to support them. On the other hand, the 100,000 elite Liaodong cavalrymen led by Fang Dingshan still had the strength. However, they weren't thinking about helping Gao Yu out of his predicament. Instead, they were thinking about how to destroy the heavy cavalry regiment led by wind-chasing wolf that they had surrounded. Fortunately, Yang Chendong's order was to surround and capture Baiming's army. So, even though the offensive seemed fierce, Gao Yu wasn't in any danger for the time being. When he knew that the situation wasn't good, he first sent someone to ask for reinforcements. Then, he immediately called for General Weika of the Firearms Division and had him lead the firearms soldiers to the front line to resist the 5-star Army's attacks. "Please don't worry, Army Supervisor," General Weika said confidently after receiving the mission. This time, he had brought over 10,000 firearms soldiers with him. Among them, there were quite a few soldiers who were armed with rifles. He believed that as long as he commanded them properly, even if they were facing fierce cavalry, they would be able to tear off a piece of flesh and let them know how powerful they were. Chapter 1329. Wei Ku was brimming with confidence, but it seemed that his luck wasn't too good. This time, he encountered the 5th Division of the 5-star Army, which was also a firearm unit. However, when comparing the weapons of the two sides, the disparity was like heaven and earth. After the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, gave the order, the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard took the lead and defeated the Baiming army outside the city. They quickly reclaimed the city gate. Soon after, the scouts reported that there were over 10,000 northern Ming soldiers with firearms approaching them. Looking from afar, they seemed to be in good order and seemed to be in order. Baiming firearms troops? Xiao Yining was stunned at first, but then he laughed out loud. Good, good. I was just about to ask them for a lesson. Tell the soldiers that their firearms can only shoot up to 120 meters. We will take care of them outside this range. Remember, injure them as much as possible. Don't kill them unless it's necessary. They are all Han like us. To become a soldier of the Cold Vanguard, the first requirement was to be a pure Han. This was something that was never discounted. As for the other foreign warriors, no matter how well they performed, or whether they had already converted to Han nationality, they had no chance of becoming a member of the Cold Front. It could be said that in the entire 5-star army, the Cold Vanguard had the purest composition. This was also because Yang Chendong didn't want other people to have advanced firearms. Otherwise, he would have to sleep with one eye open. Xiao Yining's order was passed down to the troops, and the few regimental commanders became extremely excited. They shouted loudly, "Commanders, it's time for us to practice our target practice. Next, we will compete with our marksmanship. Let's see who is more accurate and who can injure the most enemies. The 4 regiments actually treated the battlefield as a drill. They treated the enemies as targets. They didn't care who killed the most, but who injured the most. It was really strange. When Xiao Yining heard the report, he just smiled. He knew that the 5th Division spent a lot of time training and didn't have much time on the battlefield. They all needed to vent. Men, bring me my gun. We're going as well, Xiao said excitedly to the officer in charge of firearms. Not long after, the cadres and soldiers of the division headquarters all carried their matching guns and rushed straight to the outer city wall of the first city. At this time, at the beginning of the city, there was already a group of soldiers from the Baiming firearms camp rushing towards the city with guns in their hands. These Baiming firearms battalion soldiers had all kinds of weapons in their hands. There were single-shot muskets, single-shot flintlocks, and 4-shot repeating pistols. Thanks to Yang Chendong, Baiming had obtained a Type 81 automatic rifle. After countless craftsmen had disassembled and studied it, although they didn't know what a lathe was and couldn't successfully imitate it, the principles behind it had been researched by smart people, and the performance of firearms had improved. It was just that the ammunition was still iron bullets. Obviously, with their strength and technology, it was impossible to make real firearms bullets. Even so, this kind of improvement could be said to be obvious. At least, it was much better than in history. However, compared to the cold front soldiers, the difference was not small. Just in terms of the range of a firearm, the difference between them was like heaven and earth. For some reason, the 5-star army had now eliminated the Type 81 automatic rifle. First of all, it was not easy to make a lathe. Since they were going to imitate it, they might as well imitate the Type 95 automatic rifle. Therefore, the Type 81 automatic rifle quickly left the stage and was mostly stored in Yang Chendong's warehouse. After the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Division were all equipped with their Type 95 submachine guns, their firing range was around 400 meters. An effective range of 300 meters was not a problem. This time, the division headquarters had requested for the enemy to be 200 meters away, which undoubtedly increased their accuracy. This allowed Lu Wu to completely grasp the rhythm of the battle. When Xiao Yining arrived with the division headquarters, the soldiers of the other regiments had already repelled the Baiming army's first attack. Under the hail of bullets, more than 1,000 Baiming soldiers were thrown to the ground. The cold front soldiers very well carried out the orders of the division headquarters. They tried their best to injure the enemy instead of killing them. As a result, they killed fewer people and injured more people, which affected the morale of the soldiers even more. At this time, the thousands of northern Ming soldiers who were wailing at the foot of the city walls were an example. With the existence of these wounded soldiers, the other northern Ming soldiers turned pale with fright. They didn't know if they would end up like this the next time they charged. There were also some lucky Baiming soldiers who were rescued by their comrades and brought back to the barracks. However, they were still injured. Their cries of pain were heard by the other Baiming army soldiers at such a close distance. Because of this, the morale of the soldiers plummeted. Many of them showed fear in their eyes. Some were even tired of fighting. In contrast, the morale of the soldiers of the 5th Division was high. In the previous wave of attacks, not a single Baiming army soldier was able to get within 150 meters of them. This meant that their firearms did not pose any threat at all. Other than wasting some bullets, the entire 5th Division did not have a single injured soldier. The morale of the soldiers was getting higher and higher. Why is the division commander here? When Dang Liming saw Xiao Yining standing beside him, a confused expression appeared on his face. "All right, I'm here to train the division's marksmanship. I won't steal your credit." Seeing Dang Liming's intention, Xiao Yining shook his head helplessly and asked, "How is it? How are the results? Did we suffer any losses?" Knowing that Xiao Yining was not here to steal his credit, Dang Liming's expression immediately brightened. He patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, the Baiming army will not be able to get close to us. Furthermore, we have the battlements to defend ourselves. They are standing on open ground. This is just a target practice. The soldiers will not be in any danger." "Good." Xiao Yining's face lit up. Every cold vanguard soldier was carefully selected from the Han people. Most of them were originally from Crimson Castle and Ryukyu Island. If there were any casualties, he would not be able to explain it to their families. Although it was inevitable that there would be casualties in war, Xiao Yining still hoped that there would be fewer deaths. This way, he would be able to explain it to his family. While the two were talking, the Baiming army's second charge began. Compared to the previous charge of thousands of soldiers, this time there were only a few hundred soldiers. It felt more like a probing attack. Damn it, how are we going to fight with so few people? Seeing that there were less than 1,000 soldiers, Dang Liming's face was filled with displeasure. Perhaps he wished that more than 10,000 soldiers from the Baiming firearms camp would charge forward. That way, he could kill to his heart's content. Xiao Yining, who also saw this scene, patted Dang Liming's head. "Alright, the enemy has their own way of fighting. Immediately pass down the order. The 1st Regiment, 1st Battalion, and the division headquarters are responsible for shooting. Everyone else, stop." Since the number of enemies was small, it would be too wasteful if they fired all at once. It was better to fire one battalion at a time. That way, they could make a comparison and even have a competition on the battlefield to increase everyone's enthusiasm. Naturally, the division headquarters was included. This meant that they were mixing in personal goods. The other regimental commanders could not refuse. If they refused and angered Xiao Yining, he might not even give them a chance to kill the enemy. That would be unbearable. The competition between the battalions began. No matter how many soldiers from the Baiming army came, the distance of 200 to 150 meters was their life and death line. No one could rush over, let alone launch a counterattack. Not only that, after a few short charges, more and more soldiers from the Baiming army could run back without being injured. So much so that the wounded soldiers of the Baiming army were thrown under the city gate tower. When everyone screamed in pain, the other Baiming army soldiers did not dare to come forward. They were afraid that they would be one of them. The firearms camp did not play its role as expected. Instead, they were beaten into idiots. They did not even have the ability to fight back. This made Gao Yu, who was the army supervisor, very angry. However, what made him even more dissatisfied was that as the two cavalry armies under the new army continued to penetrate and cut through, he actually lost another 10,000 or so infantrymen at daybreak the next day. Moreover, most of them were injured soldiers. The number of people who truly died in battle was few and far between. It was precisely because there were too many injured soldiers in the barracks. It was more than a third of the total number of soldiers. The wails and screams of pain were endless. It was like purgatory on earth. It made people's faces change greatly. The morale of the soldiers was greatly shaken. At this moment, if there were no reinforcements, the more than 100,000 Baiming army would collapse. Reinforcements, where are the reinforcements? Looking back, Gao Yu's eyes flashed. At this moment, he finally knew the power of the 5-star army. He also began to regret that he took the initiative to go out of the city to fight. If he stayed in Tala's city, would it be much safer? Tala's city. When the 80,000 reinforcements left the city, the commander of the new 2nd Army led the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division to camp in the city. The military tents were connected to one another, and countless cavalrymen were constantly wandering around. This momentum frightened the northern Ming soldiers who were guarding the city. They also began to realize that the soldiers who had left the city were in danger. Knowing that the Baiming army outside the city may be very dangerous, whether to kill them or not became the problem that the Baiming general Zhang Peng needed to consider. He had climbed up the city tower and roughly looked at the 5-star army cavalry below the city. There were only 10,000 people. If it was only a comparison of forces, they still had a certain advantage. However, war could not be calculated like this. It had to be considered from many aspects. For example, the other side was all cavalry. They could participate in the battle. However, a part of them needed to stay in the city to defend the city. They could not all go to the battlefield. This made the gap between the two sides shrink a lot. Chapter 1330. The 5-star army was all cavalry, and they were infantry, which was a natural disadvantage. Outside of Talu's city was a vast grassland. This kind of terrain was suitable for cavalry to spread out and attack. In contrast, infantry were at a disadvantage and lost for a while. Under all kinds of reasons, Zhang Peng came to a conclusion. If they went out of the city, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. If they didn't do well, they might even lose Talu's city. Zhang Peng, who was shocked by this conclusion, was even less likely to send reinforcements out of the city. He just sent out several carrier pigeons to inform Gao Yu, who was at the beginning of the city, of his difficulties and predicament. At the same time, he also sent people to the Wan Quan department in the rear. He wanted to report this matter to Admiral Shi Heng. It would be best if Shi Heng could stand up and lead the overall situation. That way, no matter what he did, his responsibility would become very small. Everyone had selfish motives. Knowing that it was very dangerous to go out of the city, Zhang Peng, who wanted to shirk his responsibility, thought of asking Shi Heng to come out. After sending out several carrier pigeons, he waited for news in the city. After a sleepless night, the next day at dawn, he didn't receive any news from his superior. A chilly arch guarding the city ran in front of him. "General, quickly go and take a look. A lot of our defeated soldiers have come to the city. They are now being surrounded by the 5-star army cavalry." "What? Let's go." Hearing the change in the situation, Zhang Peng was shocked. He quickly went out of the mansion and went straight to the city tower. Running all the way to the top of the city tower, Zhang Peng looked up and saw a lot of soldiers wearing Baiming army uniforms being cut up by the 5-star army cavalry. They were surrounded and attacked with bows and arrows and sabers. In less than a quarter of an hour, at least several hundred Baiming army soldiers were injured on the ground, wailing and screaming. "General, look!" the same colonel shouted. "There are nearly 1,000 of them, and they're asking if we should open the gates or not." "Are we going to open them or not?" Yang Qi asked. "General, look! There's a group of about 1,000 of them, and they're calling out to us." Zhang Peng stood behind the battlements and looked down. Sure enough, he saw a large group of people wearing Baiming army uniforms arrive at the city gate. In comparison, their team still had some fighting power. At the very least, they were able to form a defensive formation. With their spears in front of them, they blocked the 5-star army's cavalry from approaching. Even so, from time to time, 1 or 2 soldiers would be injured and fall to the ground. Fortunately, the young general in command of this army had some ability. Once there was a problem, he could always let someone else fill the position. The order of the army was still maintained. However, everyone knew that they wouldn't be able to hold on for long if this continued. Therefore, the young general kept raising his head and cursing. "We're all comrades. Hurry up and open the city gates. Do you want to see so many of us die here?" Hearing these angry curses, the Baiming army guarding the city naturally didn't dare to do anything in private. However, most people still focused their gazes on Zhang Peng, waiting for this general to make a decision. At this moment, Zhang Peng's face was extremely conflicted. When Gao Yu left, she handed Talu's city to him. That was a kind of trust, but also a kind of responsibility. Logically speaking, his main task was to defend the city and prevent it from being occupied by the 5-star army. Once the city gates were opened, there would definitely be a certain amount of danger. However, looking at the other soldiers, if he really didn't save them, it would definitely chill the morale of the army. It would also be a heavy blow to his authority as a commander. If he didn't handle it well, the morale of the army would be in chaos. At that time, when he gave a military order, how many people would obey? General, please make a decision. At this moment, several Kiliarchs gathered around Zhang Peng. Their faces looked like they were willing to make a decision. They were all soldiers. Anyone could encounter danger. If they didn't save them now, then when they were in trouble one day, wouldn't others treat them the same way? In the long run, several young generals certainly hoped that Zhang Peng would help. This was not only saving others, but also saving themselves. Originally, Zhang Peng was very hesitant. Now that several Kiliarchs were pressuring him, the balance in his heart began to tilt. He asked in a deep voice, if the city gates are opened, will the 5-star army's cavalry charge into the city? This meant that Zhang Peng was going to compromise. After hearing this, the other young generals' faces flashed with joy. A quick-witted Kiliarch quickly replied, they shouldn't. We can use bows and arrows to attack. When the time comes, as long as the city gates are opened fast enough, the 5-star army won't be able to charge into the city. That's right. General, look. The 5-star army's cavalry doesn't seem to be paying attention to us. They probably don't think that we will open the city gates. There aren't many cavalry here, so our safety shouldn't be a problem. Another Kiliarch pointed below the city and explained to Zhang Peng. The other Kiliarchs also quickly explained the problem from various angles. All of them expressed the same meaning. That was, as long as they moved fast enough and were prepared, the 5-star army wouldn't be able to enter the city. They wouldn't be able to take any advantage. Seeing that everyone was so confident, Zhang Peng took a deep breath and said, okay, this general believes you. Since that's the case, prepare enough bows and arrows. We will open the city gates in a while, but we must be fast. We can't let the enemy cavalry enter the city. Yes. Zhang Peng finally made a decision. The other Kiliarchs were also very happy. At this moment, they all cupped their fists and agreed. After all, their superior was benevolent. Just this point alone wasn't a bad thing for everyone. With this order, many archers appeared on the city walls of Tulu City. The city gates were also opened from the inside. Over 100 northern Ming soldiers took this opportunity to rush out of the city gates. They shouted to the 1,000 or so comrades who were standing behind them, quickly retreat. We have archers to cover you. Many thanks. The Kiliarch, who had been cursing non-stop, had a look of excitement on his face. He immediately ordered his soldiers to retreat into the open city gates. Behind them, the 5-star army's cavalry that wanted to approach were forced back by the thousands of arrows from the city walls. It was like a net of arrows, making it impossible for anyone to enter. Ha, it's done. Zhang Peng, who was nervously staring at the city walls, couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 1,000 or so soldiers from the Baiming army being rescued. No matter what, saving 1,000 people could be considered a meritorious service. At the same time, he would be able to find out what had happened outside from these people. He would be able to find out why the 5-star army's cavalry had appeared and why the Baiming army had been defeated. Before Zhang Peng could finish his sigh of relief and before he could ask the retreating soldiers what happened outside, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. The 5-star army's cavalry that was still far away suddenly gave up on surrounding the Baiming soldiers. Instead, they angrily rushed towards the city gates that were slowly closing. Ha, are they crazy? Isn't it too late to come now? On top of the city walls, when they saw the 5-star army's cavalry rushing towards them, the Baiming army's Kiliarchs on top of the city walls laughed. They laughed at the stupidity of the 5-star army. But soon, a piece of news hit their faces like a slap, causing their complexion to instantly change. Not good, the Baiming army that we rescued suddenly betrayed us. They injured our soldiers who were guarding the city gates. They occupied the place and guarded the gate. We can't get close for a while. What? Several Kiliarchs were surprised. They were all confused. They didn't understand why their own people would hurt their own people. They just saved these people. On the other hand, Zhanpeng suddenly thought of something after being shocked for a short while. He shouted loudly, "I'm afraid that those people aren't our comrades at all. They are the 5-star army in disguise. Damn it, we've been tricked. Quick, send troops down and take back the city gate. Close it. Be quick." At this time, Zhanpeng shouted in hindsight. However, how could it be so easy to turn the tables? Under the 5-star army's long preparation, specifically under the new Second Army's commander Xi's planning, the moment they opened the city gates, they were doomed to fail. Just last night, there were cavalry scouts who reported that they discovered many defeated Baiming army infantrymen in the direction of Saihan Mountain. They asked for instructions on what to do. Xi was currently in the large tent when he was woken up. After hearing this news, he knew that the development of the war had already deviated from its original path. According to Yang Qindong's previous analysis, once the war started, the new Second Army's 2 cavalry divisions would face the danger of being attacked from 2 sides by the Baiming army. Because of this, Xi decided to defend this place no matter what. With the cavalry he brought, he still had a certain advantage. However, when he really brought his troops to Tulu city, the Baiming army's reaction was a bit unexpected. The Baiming army inside the city actually didn't make any movements. They just stood on the city gate tower, allowing them to set up formations and set up tents. This was because the Baiming army was scared. When he saw this change, Xi quickly made the decision to adapt to the changes on the battlefield. Perhaps the previous military plans were done well, but a general who couldn't adapt to changes wasn't a general. He was just a machine. From the possibility of being attacked from 2 sides to the current Baiming army holding back their troops, the new Second Army's 2 cavalry divisions were safe. However, Xi wasn't satisfied with this result. He already began to boldly imagine if he could find an opportunity to capture Tulu city and completely cut off the several 100,000 Baiming army's path of retreat. If he had made this suggestion before, it clearly wouldn't have been appropriate. But now, the cowardly behavior of the 50,000 infantrymen in Tulu city made Xi see hope. It was just that he couldn't immediately find a breakthrough point. The scouts who came to report in the middle of the night opened up a window in Shibi's heart, allowing him to see an opportunity and hope to attack Tulu city. Shibi called over the 1st Cavalry Division's commander Qiao Chao and the 2nd Cavalry Division's commander Li Jun. After a round of discussion, the 3 of them decided to disguise themselves as the Baiming army to trick the enemy into opening the city gates. Chapter 1331. In order to win this battle in one fell swoop, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Qiao Chao, volunteered to take on the task of luring the enemy to open the gate. He personally selected 1,000 Han soldiers and changed into the Baiming army's uniform. Taking advantage of the darkness, they left the camp and mingled with the Baiming army that was retreating in defeat from the direction of Saihan Mountain. It must be said that the Baiming army was indeed made up of new recruits. Normally, they looked rather powerful, but when they encountered a sudden attack, especially when they heard the rumbling of the 5-star army's warhorses, their fighting spirit quickly collapsed. A portion of them didn't even have time to brandish their weapons and arrows before running back. They had escaped from Tulu city. In many people's hearts, they believed that it would be safe to escape back here. After all, with the city walls as a shield, even if it was only psychologically, it could still give people a sense of comfort. In addition, it was night time. The addition of Qiao Chao's 1,000 soldiers didn't cause any chaos at all. When daybreak arrived, Xiao Chao led his 1,000 soldiers and intentionally began to approach Tulu city's gates. Under the new Second Army's deliberate carelessness, they were the first to arrive in front of the city gates. As expected, they attracted Zhanpeng's attention. Because of this, the city gates were opened. This was tantamount to giving Xiao Chao an opportunity to display his abilities. Speaking of which, Xiao Chao wasn't an ordinary person. He was an outstanding student from the Yang Family Academy in Crimson City. After graduation, he entered the Ministry of Public Security and completed some bandit suppression missions. Later, because of his outstanding performance, he was transferred to the Army headquarters as a combat staff officer. His performance was also outstanding. This time, there was a problem with the new Second Army. All of the division-level officers needed to be replaced. Xiao Chao obtained this opportunity. Based on his performance, he was selected to enter the new Second Army and become the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but only Xiao Chao himself knew that his military contributions were still too little. If it wasn't because the new Second Army had many problems and was only responsible for defending the city and transporting supplies, the position of commander wouldn't have been his. It was precisely because everyone looked down on the new Second Army that he picked up a loophole. Now, the new Second Army had a combat mission, and it was personally given by the 6th young master, the principal. Just based on this, Xiao Chao decided to perform well. He could not embarrass the principal, and he had to show his best side. He took the initiative to fight, and got the chance to lure the enemy to open the city gate. After careful planning and good performance, the city gates were finally opened. When Xiao Chao appeared here with a spear in his hand, it gave birth to a feeling that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 men. As long as he was still alive, he would never allow the Baiming army to take back the gate. Soldiers, kill. We must hold on until the cavalry arrives. We can do it. Xiao Chao shouted loudly to encourage his soldiers, raising their morale. Below the city gate tower, more and more Baiming army were rushing over. General Zhanpeng had issued a death order. No matter what, they had to take back the city gate. For this, they didn't hesitate to pay any price. Zhanpeng was really anxious. Originally, he wanted to save people out of kindness. Of course, he also wanted to make a contribution. But who would have thought that the people he saved were the enemy? This was a serious dereliction of duty. If he couldn't drive these people out, once the city gate was broken, he would be the biggest sinner. Zhanpeng's desperate counterattack suddenly increased the pressure on Xiao Chao. He and his soldiers had no choice but to start a massacre. They weren't just hurting people, they were killing people. When their military uniforms were dyed red with blood, the corpses of Baiming soldiers were piled up outside the city gate. This kind of ruthlessness finally shocked the Baiming army who were preparing to attack. Although these Baiming army had also been trained, this was their first time on the battlefield. When the flesh and blood scattered all over the ground, the smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Many people vomited because of this. This was different from their usual training. It was also different from the fights between the common people. This was a battle of life and death. Once they rushed forward, they would often fight to the death. No one would not cherish their own life. The only difference was whether it was worth it or not. They only had limited military pay. Just because of the general's order, they had to pay with their own life. After they died, it was difficult to get any pension policy. After they died, their family would not be taken care of. So, why should they be bathed in blood and kill? Where did their hot blood come from? In contrast, Xiao Chao and his soldiers didn't have these worries. The Yangxia government had a very sound pension policy for the soldiers. If you died in battle, your family would benefit. If you died because of meritorious service, your family would also follow you for a lifetime of glory. There were many benefits to meritorious service. If you died in battle, your family would also benefit a lot. This made everyone have no worries. Using their lives on the battlefield became a matter of course. When Xiao Chao and his men were covered in blood as if they had walked out of hell, they came to the front of the Baiming army and shouted, "Who else is there?" The Baiming army involuntarily began to retreat. This was a fear that came from the depths of their bones. "Go, go, go. Comrades, get out of the way. Our cavalry is coming." Just as Xiao Chao and his soldiers were confronting the Baiming army, behind them, the cavalry brothers of the new Second Army finally broke through the rain of arrows and entered the city gate. When the cavalry arrived, the situation on the battlefield changed dramatically. The cavalry borrowed the momentum of their horses. When they casually swung their sabers, they could carry a force of several hundred jin. Wherever they went, anyone who tried to resist was either cut in half or heavily injured by the charge of the warhorse. This was the advantage cavalry had over infantry. The arrival of the cavalry meant that Tulu city was about to change hands. Run! Seeing that the cavalry had already begun to kill, the Baiming army standing at the front fell in a short time. The rest of the Baiming army scattered like birds and beasts after an unknown person shouted. They immediately fled in all directions. Zhanpeng, who was standing at the back of the army, saw everything clearly. He staggered and almost fainted on the ground. It was the personal guard beside him who supported him and advised, "General, the situation has changed. We should run. The strength of the 5-star Army's cavalry is not something we can resist. Even if we don't open the city gate, they will find a way to open it. Let's go." The words of comfort had some effect. Zhanpeng, who was already out of his wits, kept nodding. "Okay, let's retreat. Let's retreat." Zhanpeng escaped. Taking advantage of the chaos when the cavalry entered the city, he escaped with 10,000 infantry. They ran straight to the capital head behind them. This was also the only northern Ming army that managed to escape from this battle. Following Zhanpeng's escape, Tulu city changed hands without anyone commanding it. She led the cavalry into the city and saw piles of provisions and gold and silver in the large warehouse. These were the provisions Baiming army had prepared for their 400,000-strong army. Now, they had benefited the 5-star army. She entered the city under the protection of a group of cavalry and entered Shi Heng's courtyard. Then, she sent a telegram to Yang Chendong. In this battle, she once again proved herself. It also proved that the new Second Army was a strong army that could fight. They completed their mission beyond expectations and made the impossible possible. They seized Tulu city and completely cut off the Baiming army's path of retreat. When Yang Chendong received the telegram, he couldn't help but clap. That's right, Shirlio's performance was very good, especially his reaction on the spot. Come, everyone in the army report to the new Second Army for commendation. Also, inform Shirlu to report all the meritorious officials in this battle. Yang Chendong's mood improved greatly because of this, his expression no longer as cold as before. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong's mood wasn't that good. It was all because of the telegram sent by the heavy cavalry regiment. They were surrounded by Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. They were determined to live and die with the enemy. This telegram clearly stated their situation, but at the same time, it could also be said to be a resolute telegram. How could Yang Chendong agree that a heavy cavalry regiment was about to be wiped out? He immediately replied with a telegram, asking the regiment commander to hold on until reinforcements arrived. At the same time, he reported the situation to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Regiment, and the division that were looking for Baiming's Liaodong cavalry on the battlefield. He asked them to quickly provide support to the heavy cavalry regiment. After sending these telegrams, the news of Xi's victory came, making the angry Yang Chendong feel much better. Seeing that the new Second Army had made great contributions, Yang Chendong also felt a surge of hot blood in his body. He glanced at Beta Persei beside him and suddenly asked heroically, "Beta Persei, do you dare to fight the Liaodong cavalry with the young master? Beta Persei was also a hot-blooded youth. After hearing this, his eyes lit up. He instinctively wanted to agree, but his mouth opened and he became hesitant. Of course, he himself wanted to fight Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry. This army was also famous. Beta Persei had long wanted to deal with them and let them know that there was always someone better. This was also what any 5-star army soldier wanted to do. But this matter involved Yang Chendong. It was completely different. As for how important Yang Chendong was now, there was no need to say more. It was not an exaggeration to say that if something happened to him now, Yang Xia would definitely be in chaos. Even the 5-star army would fall apart in an instant. In other words, at this time, anyone in Yang Xia could have a problem, but Yang Chendong couldn't. Now they only had 2,000 black cavalry soldiers with them. If they went to fight Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry with this small number of people, it would not be killing people, but arrogantly courting death. No. No. Beta Persei shook his head firmly. Why not? Although Yang Chendong knew the answer would be like this, he was still a little reluctant. Don't you have the guts? Chapter 1332. No. Young master's body is priceless, how can he take risks so easily? Beta Persei said, unmoved. Yang Chendong did not back down because of this, and continued to persevere. How can it be called taking risks? With the protection of the strongest black cavalry in the world, how can it be dangerous? Or are you saying that you have no confidence in the black cavalry? Beta Persei quickly shook his head and said, how can I not have confidence? The black cavalry is the strongest army in the world, no one can compare to them. Ha ha ha, if that's the case, then what are you hesitating for? Since they are the strongest, young master, my safety is of course guaranteed, right? Alright, gather the black cavalry immediately and set off with the young master to kill the enemy. Yang Chendong misunderstood Beta Persei's intention and laughed loudly before giving out orders. Soon, the first Captain Qiu V, the second Captain Dao Shao and the others led the 2,000 black cavalry and appeared in front of Yang Chendong's tent. At this moment, seeing that Yang Chendong was about to leave the tent, Beta Persei was still loudly persuading him, young master, you can't take risks. What do you mean by taking risks? We are going to kill the enemy. Let me tell you, young heir, this young master has already made up his mind. If you are still trying to persuade me, then after this battle, you should return to Crimson City. I think you have grown old and your courage has shrunk. After coldly throwing down these words, Yang Chendong strode out of the large tent. Beta Persei could no longer persuade him after he said such words. He could only follow behind Yang Chendong. He had already decided that no matter what happened, he would stand in front of Yang Chendong. Even if it was dangerous, he would become a meat shield to protect the young master's safety. Yang Chendong, who was outside the tent, indicated that he wanted to enter the battlefield and find trouble with Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry. This order naturally caused the 2,000 black cavalry dragon guards to be extremely excited. Although it was a very proud thing to be able to follow Yang Chendong, if there was a chance to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy, no one would refuse. Because that was the battlefield that men should go to. That was the best place to prove themselves and show off. The 2,000 black cavalry under Yang Chendong's encouragement, everyone's morale was high. Then, they brought their equipment and rushed straight to the area where Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry might appear. Yang Chendong's trip was not only to kill the enemy, but also to use himself as bait. He believed that even if Fang Dingshan had the ability to endure, once he knew that he was here, he would definitely not be able to endure it and appear. Contact the other armies at any time and inform them of our location. Yang Chendong wasn't a hothead. He naturally knew the importance of safety. He wouldn't just randomly charge around in anger. He had his own plan for every step he took. For example, his appearance would definitely attract the attention of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. Perhaps he would soon solve the problem of the heavy cavalry regiment being surrounded. After all, compared to himself and the heavy cavalry regiment, which target was more important, presumably, even a fool would be able to tell. Heavy cavalry regiment. At this time, Windchaser was staring at the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry that surrounded them with blood-red eyes. In the past, he had always wanted to find the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. He wanted to compete with them to prove that he was the strongest. Because of this, after receiving the military order, Windchaser immediately led the 5,000 heavy cavalry regiment into the grassland and entered the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry's area of activity. Their luck was not bad. They quickly found a group of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry that had the same number of people. Or it could be said that the other party had discovered them and took the initiative to appear. Then, a great battle ensued. The heavy cavalry regiment used facts to prove their ability. Using the advantage of heavy armor and the 3-meter-long blades in their hands, they heavily injured the enemy. In one battle, they killed 2,000 of the enemy and injured 1,000 of them. They had basically crippled the 5,000 Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. Then came the pursuit. Windchaser wanted to continue expanding the battle results, but the weakness of the heavy cavalry regiment was exposed. Because their armor and weapons were too heavy, long-distance running was not suitable for them. However, because the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry looked like they were about to run out of energy, they continued to chase. After running for a few dozen li, Windchaser found that the heavy cavalry regiment had expended too much energy. Just as he ordered the army to stop, countless Baiming's Liaodong cavalry appeared from all directions. Looking from afar, there were at least 20,000 of them. At this time, how could Windchaser not know that he had fallen into a trap? However, with their heavy armor, he was not afraid. Instead, he launched 2 counterattacks. However, the general of the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry, Luo Baikuan, was very smart. Once he discovered the heavy cavalry regiment charging over, he continuously retreated. He only used arrows to stop them and did not engage in close combat. After 2 consecutive attacks, the horses of the heavy cavalry regiment were already panting. Some of the horses could no longer bear the weight and fell to the ground. Cavalry soldiers without horses were like infantry soldiers without legs. Windchaser quickly ordered the army to dismount and prepare to meet the enemy. Then, the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry began to charge. Using the advantage of the horses, the enemy charged 3 times and killed over 1,000 soldiers of the heavy cavalry regiment, while the enemy suffered less than 50 casualties. Windchaser, who did not have a horse, finally saw the weakness of his side. He knew that it was all because he wanted to quickly gain merit. He immediately sent the telegram to Yang Chendong and then had the soldiers form a circle with the horses in the center. They were ready to meet the enemy at any time. The Baiming's Liaodong cavalry that surrounded them did not seem to be in a hurry. Other than using arrows, they did not charge. It was clear that they wanted to use up the remaining strength of the heavy cavalry regiment. After all, being surrounded, Windchaser and his soldiers could not get enough rest. In addition, they could not replenish their rations and water. After a long time, it could be said that they would collapse without a fight. Luo Baikuan clearly wanted to obtain victory without shedding a drop of blood. For this reason, they had waited for half a day. Once he found that the heavy cavalry regiment wanted to rest, he would order the cavalry to release their arrows and prepare to charge. After a few rounds, the heavy cavalry regiment was exhausted and the sky slowly darkened. But even after the sky darkened, the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry still continued to attack. During this time, they took the opportunity to launch a cavalry charge and took the lives of another 500 soldiers. They left behind dozens of corpses and left. From dusk to dawn, the eyes of the heavy cavalry regiment soldiers who had endured through the night were blood red, and Windchaser was even more so. He had even thought of charging back more than once. The horses had recovered some strength after a night of rest, but Yang Chendong's telegram clearly told them to defend and wait for reinforcements. They could not charge. In the face of the sixth young master's orders, Windchaser did not dare to disobey. He could only hold on and hope that reinforcements would arrive sooner. But the grasslands were so big that even if the cavalry wanted to rush to the battlefield, it would take a long time. The heavy cavalry regiment was destined to continue waiting. Just like this, the sky darkened again. In the blink of an eye, it was day again. When the sky brightened, Windchaser forced himself to close his eyes to look at the situation of the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. He was shocked to find that the enemies that surrounded them had already retreated. They actually retreated? Windchaser's face was filled with confusion. He personally ordered a few cavalry to get on their horses to scout for information. He was worried that this was another enemy's plan to lower his guard and then counterattack. Not long after the cavalry left, they returned. This meant that there was not a single Baiming Liaodong cavalry within 10 li of them. Although Windchaser did not know the reason, he knew that he was safe. He immediately ordered that other than sending out a few cavalry scouts, everyone else should take the time to rest. In this battle, more than half of the 5,000 heavy cavalry regiment's cavalry had died. They were almost crippled. The morale of the army was greatly affected. Their stamina was also greatly depleted. Right now, they needed a good rest. He slept from dawn to the afternoon until the scouts returned. They said that the new 101st Army commander had brought reinforcements 8 miles away. Windchaser hurriedly got up. Then, he organized the troops and prepared to welcome them. At this time, Windchaser believed that the reason why the Baiming Liaodong cavalry retreated was because they knew that the 101st Regiment was coming here. They knew that they were not a match, so they left. Just as he was thinking about how to thank the 101st Regiment commander Lu Zhua, a large group of cavalry appeared in his sight. Windchaser led a group of heavy cavalry soldiers to welcome them. When they were still some distance away, he stopped and got off his horse with a grateful expression. At the front of the cavalry was Commander Lu Zhua. At this time, he was anxiously galloping until he was less than 10 meters away from Windchaser and the others. Seeing that it was indeed Commander Lu Zhua, Windchaser quickly went to welcome him. When he was 3 meters away, he saluted and said with gratitude, "Commander Lu, thank you for coming to save the heavy cavalry regiment." "Thank you." Lu Zhua first looked behind Windchaser. When he saw that there were still 2,000 heavy cavalry soldiers, he let out a sigh of relief. Although this battle could be considered a heavy loss, the heavy cavalry regiment's foundation was still there. If they had enough time, they could recover their strength. Since the problem of the heavy cavalry regiment was solved, Lu Zhua's expression tensed up again. He looked at Windchaser and said, "You don't need to thank me. I don't have the ability to scare off the Baiming Liaodong cavalry." Huh? Wind-chasing wolf was at a loss when he heard this sentence. Lu Zhua knew that if he didn't explain, Windchaser wouldn't know what was going on. He said, "The one who really saved you was the 6th young master. He personally led 2,000 black cavalry soldiers into where the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was. The reason why the Baiming Liaodong cavalry left was to attack the 6th young master." What? Windchaser's eyes suddenly turned blood red. He looked at Lu Zhua and said loudly, "Commander Lu, please say it again." Chapter 1333. I said that in order to save you, the 6th young master took the initiative to appear on the battlefield and attracted the attention of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. The cavalry that surrounded you didn't leave because of our arrival. They left because of the 6th young master. Lu Zhua's expression didn't look too good, but he also knew that this matter wasn't Windchaser's fault. After all, Yang Chendong took the initiative to do this. Lu Zhua shouted happily, but Windchaser's face was already covered in tears. He didn't expect that in order to save him, the 6th young master would take the risk. In this case, he was such a bastard. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and gave himself a big slap. His 5 bright red fingers imprinted on his face. Okay. Seeing Windchaser hurting himself, Luzhua shook his head. Now is not the time for us to blame ourselves. How to save the 6th young master is the most important thing. I still have to lead the 101st Division forward. Since you are safe, go back to the first city and have a good rest. After saying this, Luzhua was ready to leave. In his eyes, saving Yang Chendong was the most important thing. But if he wanted to leave now, he needed Windchaser's permission. With a plop, Windchaser got off his horse and knelt in front of Luzhua's horse. Commander Lu, please allow me to go with you. Luzhua was shocked by this kneeling. After understanding Windchaser's meaning, he had to shake his head. Captain Windchaser, I want you to go back and rest. This is what the 6th young master said in the telegram. What you should do now is to obey the military order. Do you understand? No. Windchaser shook his head with a painful expression. The 6th young master came to save me. How can I do nothing? How about this, the rest of the heavy cavalry regiment will go back and rest. I will go with you alone, okay? At this moment, Windchaser had to follow Luzhua even if he had to violate military orders. This was the only thing he could do. This. Luzhua really wanted to say that it was hard to disobey military orders. However, looking at Zhui Feng's tear-streaked face and red eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say those harsh words. He could only nod his head and say, all right, then you'll go and follow behind this army commander. Mount Chiyun. Although it was called a mountain, it was actually just a slightly higher hillside. It was located on the grassland and there was nothing around it to block the view. Under the strong wind and sand, most of the trees on the mountain had withered, leaving only 3 to 5 small trees standing there. However, due to the high terrain, there was not enough water, so it was only a matter of time before it dried up. Yang Chendong chose to set up camp here for the 2,000 black cavalry soldiers. Firstly, the terrain here was high, so they didn't have to worry about the Baiming Liaodong cavalry scouts not being able to see them. Secondly, the terrain here was open, so it was more suitable for the cavalry to appear in a large area. Thirdly, from the high ground, it could be used as an unstoppable force. Guarding this place, they only needed to prepare enough water and food. Although it couldn't be said that one man could hold the pass against 10,000, it was still better than being surrounded by enemies on all sides. Yang Chendong was not disappointed even though he intended to be discovered by others. Soon, the scouts of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry appeared in the surroundings. They were constantly running back and forth as if they wanted to confirm the true identity of this group. Yang Chendong, who wanted to attract attention and save the heavy cavalry regiment, wore a golden battle robe and rode out on a white dragon. He roared at the sky and shouted in a very imposing manner, "This king is Bugnam of Gojoseon, Yang Chendong. You little rascals dare to spy here, why aren't you quickly retreating?" Just this shout alone was full of energy and could be said to be earth-shattering. Under the shout, there were indeed many scouts who quickly dispersed. Those who stayed behind also maintained a sufficient distance from them. It really was as if one sentence could shake 10,000 soldiers. After shouting away those annoying scouts, he could also use them to inform their masters. Yang Chendong believed that it wouldn't be long before there would be enemies everywhere. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. He turned to the black cavalry and said, "Chop down all the surrounding wood and stack it together to form a defensive position. Quickly do it." The Black Knight Dragon Guards, who had always regarded Yang Chendong as their leader and worshipped him as a god, immediately agreed and began to get busy. As their leader, Beta Persei naturally didn't have to do any work. He came to Yang Chendong's side and asked in a low voice, "Young master, should we send a telegram now and let the other cavalry troops gather here?" "No hurry, this will only alert the enemy. Let's wait a little longer. By the way, let the soldiers separate some of them to check the guns." They haven't been used for a while. Don't let anything happen. Yang Qindong waved his hand casually. He dared to appear here with 2,000 black cavalry because he relied on firearms. This was the strength of the black cavalry. They combined all the advantages of the cold front and cavalry. They had the ability to charge quickly and also the ability to suppress the enemy with firearms. Otherwise, even if he was confident, he wouldn't dare to take only 2,000 men to challenge the 100,000 Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry. Okay. Beta Persei happily agreed and turned to do it. He was really worried that the young master would immediately dispatch other troops, so there would be someone to steal their credit. Now, 2,000 against 100,000. Even if they couldn't get half of them, it was enough to kill to their heart's content. Only a thick-skinned person like Beta Persei would think this way. Perhaps in his eyes, Yang Qindong's existence was an invincible legend. As for the scouts of Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry, they left excitedly after seeing Yang Qindong appear in Qian Mountain and reported to Fang Dingshan, who was hiding in a mountain forest 80 miles away. Fang Dingshan was very cunning. He didn't stay with Gao Yu's hundreds of thousands of soldiers because he was afraid that he would be implicated by the other party. He was just an army supervisor who had never fought in a war. It didn't seem credible to say that he could defeat the 5-star army in one battle. However, Fang Dingshan didn't have the intention to dissuade Gao Yu. He didn't even look suspicious. He had his own calculations, or rather, he needed someone to attract the attention of the 5-star army. This would make it easier for him to do things. Things developed as he expected. The scouts reported that Gao Yu's situation wasn't very good. After the siege was blocked, the cannons were blown up. It was said that the 5-star army had surrounded them. It seemed that things weren't looking good for them. Fang Dingshan, who rejoiced at his foresight, immediately locked onto the 5-star army's heavy cavalry regiment and waited for the news of victory. Fang Dingshan was still very capable. At least, he had done a lot of work to understand the 5-star army. For example, the heavy cavalry regiment was one of the targets he carefully understood. Then, he found the weakness of the other party. It was because their equipment was heavy and they couldn't fight for a long time. After finding the weakness, he only needed to counteract it. This was how the heavy cavalry regiment was surrounded. Next, he just needed to wait for the good news. While waiting, a young scout with an excited face half-knelt in front of him. "General, great news, great news." "Oh? Has the heavy cavalry regiment already been devoured by us?" Fang Dingshan asked calmly. However, he wasn't that excited. Although it was a merit to take down a heavy cavalry regiment, the other party only had 5,000 cavalrymen after all. For him who had 100,000 cavalrymen, it wasn't a big deal. No. The scout's face was still red because of his excitement. "General, we found Bugnam of Gojoseon." When he heard that they didn't destroy the heavy cavalry regiment, Fang Dingshan's face still had a trace of unhappiness. However, after that, he suddenly stood up with his eyes wide open. He asked as if he didn't hear clearly, "Wait, what did you just say? Who did you find?" "General, we found Bugnam of Gojoseon. He only brought 2,000 black cavalry soldiers to Qian Mountain." The scout's voice rose an octave. They found Yang Qindong with only 2,000 cavalry soldiers. This news was like a bolt of lightning that shocked Fang Dingshan. He was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. As for whether it was the black cavalry or not, he didn't care. After all, there were only 2,000 people. How could they be a match for his elite Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry? Excitement, excitement. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the biggest threat to Baiming wasn't the southern Ming dynasty, nor was it Yang Xia or the 5-star army. It was Yang Qindong. As long as he got rid of this person, it was equivalent to getting rid of the biggest worry in his heart. This way, the emperor could sit back and do what he wanted to do without any worries. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that whoever could kill Yang Chendong would definitely be a great contributor to Baiming. No. It would also be a great contributor to the southern Ming dynasty. In short, it would be a blessing for the great Ming dynasty. For this, it would be worth it even if they had to pay a huge price. Fang Dingshan was also tempted by such a great contribution. However, after seeing the strength of the 5-star army, he had no choice but to suppress this thought. He never thought that an opportunity would appear like this. Yang Chendong would appear in his field of vision with only 2,000 cavalry soldiers. Could it be that the heavens wanted him to die and wanted to give him a great contribution? The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. After a long while, Fang Dingshan finally calmed down. When he looked at the scout, his eyes were full of excitement. Did you find out if there are any other 5-star army soldiers moving around? Fang Dingshan couldn't be blamed for asking this. Yang Chendong's sudden appearance with so few guards around him, he couldn't help but wonder if this was a trap. No, this general has already sent out all the scouts. There are no traces of the 5-star army within 100 li radius. I have already arranged for them to continue expanding the search area. How could the scout not understand this logic? If he couldn't even figure out this problem, he wouldn't be worthy of being a scout. Enough, enough. After hearing that there were no 5-star army movements within 100 li radius, Fang Dingshan nodded his head in satisfaction. So what if Bailey Wudi was really a trap? As long as he was given 4 hours, he could use his army to eliminate these 2,000 cavalry soldiers. This way, once Yang Chendong died, the so-called encirclement would be meaningless. That, did you see clearly? Was that Bugnam of Gojoseon? Chapter 1334. Fang Dingshan was worried that the one being surrounded was not Bugnam of Gojoseon. If that was the case, not only would it be a joke, but it would also put the entire army in danger. Yes. The scout replied with a firm tone, this general has personally seen Bugnam of Gojoseon. I will definitely not be mistaken. Good. Hearing such a firm reply, Fang Dingshan laughed heartily. He then patted the scout's shoulder with his right hand and said with satisfaction, you did well. This time, killing Bugnam of Gojoseon will be a great achievement. Now, send out all the scouts. Once you discover any reinforcements from the 5-star army, report to me immediately. After receiving Fang Dingshan's encouragement and praise, the scout left with a face full of excitement. At this time, Fang Dingshan had already made up his mind. He wanted to surround Yang Chendong and kill him. He wanted to kill Bugnam of Gojoseon and achieve a great achievement. When the emperor heard this news, he would definitely be very happy. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to be conferred a duke. Men, this general wants to immediately summon all the generals at home. On Chiyun Mountain. The black cavalry had already cut down many huge trees and placed them together to form a solid defensive wall. It was not like a trench where the trees were placed together to form a house. The large gaps were blocked with huge logs, leaving only a few small gaps for the muzzles to be placed. This way, it would not delay the shooting of the enemy and could also effectively block most of the arrows fired by the enemy. Buckets of clean water were also placed in the wooden huts. There were also prepared dried bacon, 5 meats, ham sausages, instant noodles, and some dry rations. Boxes of shiny yellow bullets were stacked together. There was even a large-scale toilet that had just been built not far away. Yang Chendong was clearly prepared for a long battle. What bullshit Baiming Liaodong cavalry? What Baiming elites? Yang Chendong was going to fight the elites. He wanted to use this battle to let the enemy know the difference between the two sides. From now on, they would be honest and would not cause trouble for him. Therefore, even though the Black Knight Dragon Guard had already seen through the binoculars that many northern Ming Liaodong iron cavalry were gathering nearby and were slowly encircling this place, he had no intention of sending a telegram for help. He wanted to first weaken the enemy's morale. For this battle, Yang Chendong took out a lot of light and heavy machine guns and ammunition from the warehouse. He wanted to give the Baiming Liaodong cavalry a head-on blow. If the reinforcements appeared too early, Fang Dingshan would not have to pay such a huge price. Long Wei, get ready. If you feel that you can't hold on, this king will send a telegram to the 1st Cavalry Division, he said in a provocative tone. After these words, some of the black cavalry soldiers' faces turned red. The deputy commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ba Daojiang, was a straightforward person. He was also deeply trusted by Yang Chendong, so he did not have to worry too much about what he said. Therefore, he was the first to object. 6th young master, please go ahead. We don't need any reinforcements. We can still beat up these Baiming Liaodong cavalry until they cry for their parents. With Ba Daojiang taking the lead, the others soon followed and shouted, yes, we don't need reinforcements. We are the most powerful. Huh, good. Then this king will sit and watch your performance. This was exactly the result that Yang Chendong wanted. He chuckled and sat on a wooden chair that Beta Persei and the others had just made. He drank the brewed tea, crossed his legs, and leisurely closed his eyes while singing an unknown song. Yang Chendong was very optimistic about this battle since he was prepared to use firearms against cold weapons. The existence of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was like a thorn in the Yangtze, becoming the biggest threat to Shi City. If he did not remove this thorn, he was afraid that he would be infected at any time and hurt his whole body. Yang Chendong would never allow such a thing to happen. In order to completely solve this problem, he used a lot of firearms this time and even took the initiative to test it out. Even if he had no choice but to take the lives of some Han warriors, he had to do it. Fortunately, according to the intelligence department's understanding, the core component of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was not the Han people, but the Manchu and some Mongolian people. This made him not show any mercy when he attacked. As for whether it was dangerous for him to stand here, Yang Chendong had never thought about it. It was impossible to say that there was no danger at all. Even if there was a war, there would be deaths and injuries. However, it was unrealistic to say that it was very dangerous. After all, he had too many abilities to protect himself. Even if these 2,000 black cavalry could not hold on, he was not afraid. He had plenty of methods to deal with his opponent. Right now, it was just a matter of whether the other party had the ability to force him. At this moment, Yang Chendong, who had his eyes closed, thought of the big warehouse. He thought of the neat rows of war chariots, tanks, and even helicopters inside. This was his true trump card. Just based on this, even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would not be able to enter. With the protection of the big warehouse, Yang Chendong had such confidence. Although he did not know what caused this, with such ability, he had to do something. The world was one, and the Han people were supreme. This became Yang Chendong's goal. Although it seemed that this goal was too grand and difficult to achieve, it was still a dream. However, Yang Chendong firmly believed that as long as he did it step by step, there would be a possibility of success. If he only thought about it every day and did nothing, not to mention that his life was just a short few decades, even if he was given thousands of years, so what? Thinking about this, Yang Chendong slowly fell asleep. There was a peaceful smile on his face, as if he had seen something in his dream that made him happy. Young master, the enemy is about to attack. Seeing Yang Chendong sleeping so soundly, Beta Persei did not want to disturb him. However, after considering that the battle would start soon and the sound of gunfire would not be small. If he did not wake up the young master, it would be a big crime if he really scared him. Oh, is it coming? Slowly opening his eyes, Yang Chendong first rubbed his eyelids, then slowly got up. Biming that the Liaodong cavalry would not attack him, Yang Chendong did not have any doubts about this matter. With such a piece of fat meat in front of him, there was no reason not to eat it. Although it was not appropriate to compare himself to a piece of fat meat, Yang Chendong knew very well that this was the case. After getting up, Yang Chendong took the binoculars from Beta Persei's hands and looked around. Sure enough, Qian Mountain was surrounded by Biming Liaodong cavalry. They were wearing the Great Ming Dynasty's Mandarin duck military uniform. Each of them held a saber in their hands and led their horses. They looked like they were ready to charge at any time. Quite a lot of them came. There was no trace of fear on his face. On the contrary, Yang Chendong seemed to smile with satisfaction. Then, he strode towards the high platform in the tent. That was built by Beta Persei and the others before, so that they could stand higher and see further to observe the enemy. Now, Yang Chendong walked up to the platform. Then, he stood at the highest point of Qian Mountain in his golden battle robe. The appearance of the golden color instantly attracted everyone's attention. "Young master, be careful." Seeing Yang Chendong walk to the highest point before the start of the battle, Beta Persei, who was afraid of danger, hurriedly shouted. Xiao Vi, Dao Xiao, Ba Daojiang, Peng Yu, and the others behind him were also worried. "It's okay." Yang Chendong casually waved his hand, telling Beta Persei and the others not to be excited. Then, he said to Telecommunications Director Wang Shan, "Bring me the loudspeaker." Wang Shan, who had been promoted to director, hurriedly handed over the iron loudspeaker that he had prepared long ago. Although this thing was a little rough, it could still play a certain role in amplifying the sound. He slowly raised the loudspeaker with his right hand and placed it near his mouth. Yang Chendong's voice also spread far and wide. "Brothers of the Biming army, I am Yang Chendong, Bugnam of Gojoseon, a king personally conferred by the emperor. But I don't know why you are here. Are you here on the emperor's orders? If not, isn't this no different from a rebellion? If that's the case, you'd better retreat quickly. This king is merciful and can forget all about your appearance here. But if you still don't obey, then don't blame this king for being ruthless. Later, the army will surround you. When that time comes, you won't have a chance to escape. You can decide for yourselves where to go." After shouting loudly, Yang Chendong put away the loudspeaker and returned to the wooden base from the high ground. Seeing that he was safe and sound, Beta Persei first breathed a sigh of relief, but then said with a bitter face, "Young master, I'm afraid it's useless to say this now." Looking at Beta Persei's expression, how could Yang Chendong not know that this person was simply afraid that his words would scare away the Biming Liaodong cavalry? But he didn't point it out and nodded in agreement. "Of course it's useless, and I don't expect it to be useful. I said this to tell Fong Dingshan that this king is here, so that he can attack without worry." With this explanation, everyone was suddenly enlightened. Although Yang Chendong had shown himself before, only a few scouts had seen him. Even if it was reported to Fong Dingshan, he would only believe 70% of it. Only after witnessing it with his own eyes would he feel relieved. Otherwise, if the attack didn't go well, and he doubted whether Yang Chendong was really here, what would happen if he retreated? After Yang Chendong's appearance, things were different. After confirming the authenticity of Yang Chendong's appearance, Fong Dingshan would definitely not withdraw his troops unless there was really no hope left for him to make a great contribution. This was the reason why Yang Chendong had to show himself before the battle. This was tantamount to giving Fong Dingshan a reassurance. "This king is right here, come if you have the ability." After knowing Yang Chendong's intentions, Yang Er and the others laughed mischievously. With sufficient preparation, they were most worried that the enemy would run away. If that was the case, then wouldn't they have no place to display their skills? Now, they were even more confident. Each of them laughed heartily and waited for the enemy to charge in and kill them. Chapter 1335. As the Black Cavalry, they were awe-inspiring. However, as the Yang faction continued to grow, they gradually began to feel like heroes had no place to display their talents. Like today, there were not many opportunities to lead the enemy to encircle them. Everyone wanted to perform well, not to mention that they were so well prepared. Look, each person had a Type 95 gun, a squad had 2 light machine guns, a heavy machine gun, a platoon had a 100mm mortar, and countless ammunition. With such weapons, how could they face any enemy? Not to mention 100,000, even if there were 200,000 or 500,000, what could they do? At this time, the 2,000 Black Cavalry were all eager to fight. They had already taken off their black armor and were waiting for the enemy to attack. The war was about to begin. After Beta Persei got Yang Chendong's approval, he began to assign tasks. Considering that there were 3 slopes on Qiyun Mountain, 1 steep slope, and the area was not very large, Beta Persei divided the Black Cavalry into 2 groups. They were the first and second groups. He requested that when the battle started, the groups would fight one by one, with a limit of 2 hours, and they would take turns to rest. And each group would take out 200 people, a total of 400 people as an emergency team. In case of an accident, there would be soldiers available. Even if they had the best weapons, the number of troops was also very important. Otherwise, if 2,000 people were to shoot randomly, even if they had good weapons, what could they do? In the end, people were still needed in a war. The Black Cavalry of Qiyun Mountain were making all kinds of preparations. General Fang Dingshan at the foot of the mountain was also flushed. If he had only heard about it before, then he had seen it with his own eyes. The person who shouted was Bugnam of Gojoseon, especially that voice. When he was an imperial bodyguard, he had seen Yang Chendong more than once and heard his voice. Even if it was confirmed that the person who was surrounded was Bugnam of Gojoseon and did not run away, Fang Dingshan firmly believed that his chance to make a great contribution had come. It was only 2,000 cavalrymen. Even if they could fight, how could they be a match for his army of 100,000? Even if it was a battle of attrition, he would exhaust these people to death. Not to mention, the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's reputation as elites was not undeserved. Their combat strength was very strong, and they believed that there was no target that they could not take down. Pass down the order. Let's use 1,000 cavalry as a unit and charge. Other than the steep side, attack the other 3 sides with all your might. Don't be afraid of sacrificing yourself. Try to take down Mount Qiyun in one go. If you can't do it, attack them one by one. I will exhaust them to death, Fang Dingshan shouted excitedly. He had no intention of underestimating the 2,000 Black Cavalry soldiers. He had also made many preparations so that he could react at any time. Considering the terrain of Mount Qiyun, sending too many people up would not be of much use. He decided to send 3,000 men to observe the situation first. If there was a chance, the whole army would attack. If it did not work, then he would look for a change. Fang Dingshan was clearly a qualified general. He was not arrogant at all. On the contrary, even when he attacked, he was very careful. When he came up, he would try to probe the enemy. He could be considered an excellent general. With a command, 3,000 Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry from 3 directions moved out. Under the beating of the war drums, they spurred their horses forward. 3,000 cavalrymen came from afar in a fan-shaped formation. The cavalrymen were constantly making all kinds of evasive maneuvers. Sometimes they were on top of their horses, sometimes they were below their horses, and sometimes they were close to their horses. Their superb horsemanship was displayed incisively and vividly. They're finally here. On Mount Qiyun, Beta Persei rubbed his hands excitedly. His eyes never left the battlefield for a moment. When he saw that the distance between the 2 sides was less than 800 meters, he stretched out his hands and placed them on the butt of a heavy machine gun. Soldiers of the 1st Brigade, pay attention. Don't be impulsive. Wait until the enemy is 300 meters away. This time, we won't let them go back. 300 meters was only 10 breaths of time for the charging cavalry. It was dangerous to launch a counterattack at this time. However, after seeing the excellent weapons of the Black Knights and Dragon Guards, everyone felt that it was only right and proper. Moreover, everyone was full of confidence. On the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry side, Fang Dingshan walked out of the main tent and looked over. He also wanted to see how Yang Chendong was going to get out of the encirclement. Just now, the scout had reported that there were no reinforcements from the 5-star army within 100 miles. In other words, the 2,000 black cavalry were still alone. This made Fang Dingshan overjoyed. With this, he was even more confident that he could kill Bugnam of Gojoseon here. His gaze followed the cavalry's charge. When he saw that they were less than a mile away from the 5-star army's camp, Fang Dingshan was so nervous that his throat almost jumped out of his throat. At this moment, he was full of confidence. He believed that at such a distance, the cavalry was the absolute ruler of the battlefield. The black cavalry had no room to struggle. He was even prepared to order the entire army to charge. Although he only brought 40,000 Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry because of time constraints, he was confident that it would not be a problem to take care of 2,000 enemy cavalry. 500 meters. 400 meters. 350 meters. At this distance, those with good eyesight could even see the faces of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. They could also see that they were holding onto their bows and ready to shoot at any time. Some of the black cavalry also reflexively began to sweat. Attack! Just when some of the black cavalry were so nervous that they could not help but fire, the temporary commander, Beta Persei, shouted. Then, the heavy machine gun in his hand was the first to fire. Bullets swept forward like beans. The 5 Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry in this area were like grass that was crushed by a boulder. They instantly fell to the ground together with their horses. Attack! The captain of the 1st Brigade, Qiu Vi, and the vice-captain, Badao Jiang, shouted at the same time. Then, the light and light guns and the Type 95 continuous fire and burst fire sounded together. The battlefield was instantly surrounded by all kinds of bullets. One by one, the hot bullet shells kept jumping on the ground. Following that, one by one, the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry fell to the ground. As the ancient said, shoot the horse before shooting the man. But in the eyes of the black cavalry, who had good marksmanship, they preferred to shoot people. It gave them a greater sense of achievement. This also showed the strength of the black cavalry. They had all undergone high-intensity shooting training. Who knew how many bullets they were fed, but their marksmanship was not bad. This time, they finally had a chance to show off. Bullets rained down. One after another, the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry fell on the path of the charge. It was a pity that their exquisite horsemanship and impressive martial arts did not even have a chance to display them at this moment. Bullets flew everywhere. In just a quarter of an hour, the 3,000 black cavalry were completely annihilated. Fang Dingshan did not give the order to retreat. Not a single one of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry retreated. It could be seen that their military discipline was very strict. Hiss! Fang Dingshan in the middle of the army felt a pain in his teeth. These were 3,000 black cavalry. Just like that, they died on the charge. Not a single one of them even had the chance to swing their weapons. This loss made him feel a toothache, a headache, and pain all over his body. General, what do we do? They actually have firearms. Yuji General Mu Qiong also had a pained expression as he asked Fang Dingshan. The black cavalry actually had firearms. This was indeed out of Fang Dingshan's expectations. However, it was absolutely impossible for them to retreat just like that. It was not easy to get a chance to surround Yang Chendong. He would not give it up so easily. Facing his subordinate's question, Fang Dingshan pretended to be indifferent and said, "Isn't it just firearms? We Baiming iron cavalry have them too. We've seen them before. No matter how powerful they are, they still need to use gunpowder. After all, they only have 200 men. I want to see what they will do once they run out of gunpowder. Come, let's order 3,000 more. No. 6,000 black cavalry, charge." Fang Dingshan did not believe in heresy. After giving this order, he turned to a scout and said, "Immediately send a message to General Luo Baikuan. Tell him to come over here. This time, even if we have to use numbers, we must keep Bugnam of Gojoseon here." Just like that, Yang Chendong's first goal was achieved. That was to rescue the heavy cavalry windchaser unit that was surrounded. With himself as the target, he successfully attracted over 100,000 Baiming Liaodong iron cavalry to rush over. On Qiyun Mountain. After the first wave of enemies was completely wiped out, there was a burst of cheers from above. Every soldier of the Black Cavalry's 1st Battalion was filled with excitement and excitement. Just now, they had fought to their heart's content. Only now did they know that compared to fighting on horseback, killing with guns was much more satisfying and clean. The 1st Battalion had a good time, while the 2nd Battalion's members were filled with envy and jealousy. The 2nd Battalion's commander, Dao Shao, purposely approached the temporary commander Beta Persei and said, "Second brother, do you think it's our turn now?" "Oh. It's not time yet, but you can discuss it with Captain Xiu. As long as he agrees, I don't mind." Beta Persei was in a good mood and naturally would not reject Dao Zhao's desire to kill the enemy. He looked at the military watch on his wrist and said casually, Okay. Dao Shao immediately nodded in agreement and walked to Qiu V's side. Before he spoke, he smiled and said, "Captain Qiu, Brother Qiu. Don't say anything. A battalion takes an hour. We've only used less than half of that time. You guys wait a little longer." Qiu V was having a good time. How could he agree to a change of guard so easily? This was such a good opportunity. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was a once-in-a-decade opportunity. Moreover, even if he agreed, the brothers below him would most likely not agree. Chapter 1336. After being rejected, Dao Zhao's expression turned ugly. When he returned to his own unit, he looked at the expectant faces of his subordinates. He could only pretend to be indifferent and said, "Don't worry, there are still so many enemies here, and there will be more and more. 100,000 people is enough for us to kill to our heart's content." The morale of the members of the 2nd unit was low, but when they heard their leader's words, they were all in high spirits again. That's right, there were so many enemies. Could it be that they would all be wiped out by the 1st unit? Look, the enemy is charging again. This time, there are even more of them. A scout held a pair of binoculars and reported the situation loudly. Good. Hearing this, not only did no one on the mountain show any signs of fear, but instead, the members of the 1st unit were all excited. On the other hand, Dao Shao and the others were envious. Some of them were even praying in their hearts, "Don't charge so fiercely. Leave some for us to kill." The 6,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry charged forward bravely and fearlessly, as if the death of the 3,000 Baiming cavalry did not affect them at all. It had to be said that Fang Dingshan was a person who knew the army well, and he was also a general who was strict in military discipline. Of course, this was also inseparable from the environment of the Great Ming Dynasty. If a martial artist wanted to have a bright future, they could only do so through military merit. Being on the battlefield was the only chance for them to perform. In addition, the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was very clear about rewards and punishments, so the 6,000 Baiming cavalry charged forward fearlessly. They still don't know the power of our firearms. Come, get ready. When I open fire, don't hold back and kill them all." Beta Persei shouted excitedly. He did not know how long it had been since he had a good battle. He felt all the blood in his body rushing to his head, and he only wanted to continue killing the enemies. Gunshots rang out from the distance of 300 meters, and just like before, the 6,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry fell to the ground amidst the gunshots and cannons. Still, no one could reach the top of Qiyun Mountain. 6,000 people. Although the number was twice as much as before, they were still completely wiped out in less than an hour. After the battle, Beta Persei commanded the 400 black cavalry as a reserve force to rush out of the wooden house and onto the battlefield, bringing back some of the ownerless warhorses. During this process, they even discovered more than 100 wounded soldiers of the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. When they saw the black cavalry dragon guards finally approaching, they seemed to have seen new hope. Unfortunately, in front of the 400 reserve members who were already prepared, they didn't even have the chance to jump up and swing their swords before they were killed by the flying bullets. War horses could be bought. These were all healthy horses, and Bei Ming had spent a lot of money to get them. However, he couldn't take these soldiers. There were only 2,000 black cavalry soldiers on the mountain. If there were too many prisoners, it would be hard to avoid unexpected dangers. Yang Chendong was here, so he couldn't be careless about safety. They wouldn't lose the big picture for the small. A total of more than 1,000 high-quality warhorses were captured. At this time, they were all placed in a corner of the mountain. There was already a horse stump there. It was obvious that they were prepared. Another 6,000 black cavalry soldiers were completely wiped out. Fang Dingshan's expression became extremely ugly when he saw this. In less than an hour, they had already lost 9,000 black cavalry soldiers. Fang Dingshan's heart ached. He had spent a lot of effort to train every single one of these black cavalry soldiers. On the battlefield, he felt that it was not worth it even if they were replaced by 2 or 3 5-star army soldiers. But now, 9,000 black cavalry soldiers rushed out and didn't even hurt a single hair on the enemy's head. This was very difficult for him to accept. The other generals stood in the big tent at this moment, not knowing what to do. If someone had told them before today that 2,000 enemies would be enough to render them helpless, they would probably have laughed out loud. But when the truth really happened, they realized that nothing was impossible. What was worse was that they didn't know what to do. Retreating was impossible. It wasn't easy to catch Bugnam of Gojoseon, and the scouts would report the surrounding situation every hour. Until now, there were no signs of other 5-star army reinforcements. How could they give up such a rare opportunity? If they couldn't retreat, then they could only charge. But how could they charge to reduce their losses and achieve their goal? Although it was called a siege, there were many ways to do so. For example, the most commonly used method was to surround the enemy without fighting. They would wait for the enemy to run out of food and water. Then, they would surround the enemy and block the enemy. But the problem was that Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was surrounded, wouldn't give them too much time. Who knew how many 5-star army soldiers had already received the news and were rushing here? Just the word "wait" was enough to make them fall into a disadvantage. Continue to attack. I want to see how much gunpowder they have. Mu Qiong, you take command. Only send out 500 cavalrymen at a time. Spread out and waste the enemy's gunpowder. Fang Dingshan was naturally unwilling to give up such a good opportunity. After thinking for a while, he made this decision. General is wise. After hearing Fang Dingshan's decision, the other generals cupped their fists and looked as if it was only natural. No matter what, a small-scale attack would reduce the risk of their lives. In their hearts, they also wanted to see how much gunpowder this 2,000 5-star army had. Once the enemy ran out of gunpowder, it would be time for them to charge forward and seize victory. Mu Qiong accepted the order and sent out the first 500 cavalrymen. These 500 cavalrymen split into 3 different directions and charged towards the peak of Qian Mountain. The formation was very scattered, and this was the best way to distract the enemy's gunpowder. At the peak of the mountain, 2 hours had passed. It was finally the second team's turn to fight. However, what was depressing was that after 15 minutes, the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen still did not make any moves. This made Captain Dao Shao unable to hold it in any longer and cursed out loud. "What's going on? Did they admit defeat? I say, if you have the guts, come at me. I'll be waiting for you here." Perhaps it was because of his cursing. Not far away, they could finally see the figures of the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen. However, compared to the previous 2 attacks, there were much fewer of them. With the mindset that a few pieces were still meat, Dao Zhao's second team's soldiers were still in high spirits. "Everyone, follow your positions and focus on your targets. Don't waste bullets. Try to hit them with one shot." Dao Shao was smart. He did not have as many enemies as the first team, so in terms of killing, he could not compare. Since that was the case, then he would compete with his marksmanship. If he could kill an opponent with one shot, then even if there were fewer enemies, he would still be able to shine. 800 muskets against 500 enemies. Before the battle even started, the result was already decided. In just 2 rounds of shooting, many of the soldiers did not even fire a single shot, and the 500 cavalrymen were all sent to meet the King of Hell. Yang Chendong had already arrived at the front of the formation. He had clearly seen what had just happened, and his heart was filled with emotions. If he had not personally been on the battlefield, he would not have thought that victory would be so simple. When the 8-nation alliance first entered Beijing, there were only 10,000 of them. However, they were able to beat up the Qing dynasty's army, which seemed to have a lot of resources, to the point where they could not even tell which way was north. That was because they had been constantly attacking. They were not as well prepared and well equipped as he was. The advantage of firearms against cold weapons was simply too great. On the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen's side, another 500 cavalrymen died. If one looked closely, they did not even make a splash on the battlefield. Mu Qiong's expression became very ugly. He really wanted to ask General Fang Dingshan to tell him that the battle could not continue like this, but he did not dare to. Before he received any new orders, he could only continue to charge. He only hoped that these people would waste the 5-star army's gunpowder and prepare for the final charge. Just like that, every hour or so, the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen would charge. The number of people charging varied. Sometimes there were 500 of them, while other times there were only 200 to 300 of them. They were using their lives to fight the Black Cavalry's gunpowder consumption. However, wasn't this giving the Black Cavalry a chance to practice target shooting? This was a real enemy, and such a chance to practice target shooting was rare. Every soldier took the opportunity to ensure that they did not fire. If they did, they would be able to take the enemy's life. The sky quickly darkened, but the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's attack did not stop. They already knew that there were only 2,000 Black Cavalry Dragon Guards in the mountains, so they thought that even if they had to waste time, they would exhaust the enemy's strength. In this regard, Beta Persei asked for instructions from Yang Chendong, and as expected, he took measures to deal with it. A team of 200 people was the norm, and the rest were all to rest. In this way, the problem was easily solved. Not long after, all kinds of snoring and grinding sounds came from the mountains. Compared to the Black Cavalry sleeping soundly, Fang Dingshan was not in the mood to sleep at all. He walked out of the main tent and looked at Qi Yunshan, who was several miles away. His eyes flashed with an indescribable anger. "Just you wait. When my reinforcements arrive tomorrow, we will launch a charge all over the mountains and plains. At that time, I don't believe that you will still have 1,000 hands and feet. Let's see who will be the final victor." Fang Dingshan was already angry. He swore that he would take revenge. For this, he would rather fill in the 100,000 lives here. As long as he could kill Yang Chendong, everything would be worth it. Without a leader, the 5-star army would not be a threat to Baiming. Chapter 1337. At the same time, Yang Chendong, who was on Qian Mountain, had also woken up. When he saw that Wang Shan had also fallen asleep on his bed, he did not disturb him. Instead, he sat in front of the telegraph machine and began to report to the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division, the new 101st Army, and the divisions directly under them. Looking at the situation on the battlefield today, his safety was naturally not a problem. Even so, what he needed to do now was not for these people to come and help him. Instead, he needed them to set up an inescapable net outside the battlefield. When the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was defeated and retreated, they would surround and eliminate the enemy. Yang Chendong wanted to use this battle to get rid of the malignant tumor of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. He wanted to use this battle to shut the mouths of the Baiming people and slap their faces. He wanted to make them uncontrollably afraid and fearful when they thought of him. Whether it was waiting or anticipating, the sky finally brightened. Both sides seemed to have formed some kind of tacit agreement. They stopped fighting and started to make breakfast. For a moment, smoke rose in spirals and floated in the sky above and below the mountain. Fang Dingshan quickly finished his breakfast. Mu Qiong walked into the main tent with a blood-red face. He did not sleep last night as he continuously planned all kinds of attacks. Unfortunately, there was almost no effect. He did not even know if this kind of attack affected the sleep of the Black Cavalry. Seeing Mu Qiong walk in, Fang Dingshan sat up straight and asked with a trace of expectation, "How is it?" He already knew that the result would not be good. Otherwise, he would not have sent people to find Mu Qiong. Mu Qiong would have taken the initiative to come. This subordinate is guilty. Mu Qiong did not say anything else and knelt on the ground. Although it was Fang Dingshan who gave the order to continuously attack, Fang Dingshan was a superior. He was the one who carried out the order. If there was a problem, he would have to take responsibility. Fortunately, although Fang Dingshan was greedy for power, he was not an unreasonable person. "All right, stand up and speak." This general gave the order. "No matter what the result is, I will not blame you." "Thank you, General." Mu Qiong's face finally looked better, and he spoke more clearly. "General, after the sky turned dark yesterday, I continuously ordered my men to charge. There were a total of 13 times, and nearly 3,000 cavalrymen were killed. Due to the cover of the night, only 7 of them managed to escape, and 5 of them were injured." Fang Dingshan's face darkened when he heard that they had lost so much in one night. However, he still asked expectantly, "Did anyone manage to get to the top of the mountain? Do you know how much gunpowder they have left?" "This. No. The defenses on the mountain are tight. We don't have a chance to rush up." Mu Qiong lowered his head and said nervously. Although Fang Dingshan had expected this outcome, he still sighed in disappointment when he heard it. "Is Qian Mountain really so heavily guarded?" "Yes, they have something that can light up everything. Once we charge, this thing will appear and all of our cavalrymen will be exposed. They won't even have time to react before they are shot dead by firearms." Mu Qiong was amazed by the advanced weaponry of the Black Cavalry as he spoke with lingering fear. He would never forget that once the thing that could light up everything appeared, it would be as bright as day on the top of the mountain, and no one would be able to hide from it. "If that's the case, we can't even attack at night." Fang Dingshan was shocked to hear that such an advanced weapon had appeared. He had completely given up on the idea of attacking at night. Yes, once that thing appears, the cavalrymen will be unprepared and will not be able to adapt to it. Especially the war horses, they will neigh uncontrollably and will not be able to charge at full speed. Mu Qiong wanted to continue exaggerating the power of the weapon, but Fang Dingshan interrupted him. Alright, I got it. Yes Hen, go and rest. General, aren't we going to attack later? Mu Qiong was naturally happy to hear that he could rest, but he was also worried that he would be woken up before he could fall asleep, so he asked. Wait, General Luo will be here soon. Once he arrives, we will launch a big attack. No matter what, this time we must take down Qiyun Mountain and take Bugnam of Gojoseon's head. Fang Dingshan was almost furious as he spoke. If one listened carefully, one could hear the sound of teeth gnashing. The battlefield suddenly quieted down. This made Qiu Vi and Dao Shao unhappy. After resting for a night, they thought that the battle would continue and they would be able to kill to their heart's content. However, Baiming's Liaodong cavalry was terrified. This was really disappointing. Don't worry, it's just the darkness before dawn. Perhaps the big attack will begin soon. Yang Chendong's face was calm, but his words were full of murderous intent. He didn't believe that Baiming's Liaodong cavalry would give up the chance to kill him. They weren't attacking now, but they were just waiting. The more they acted like this, the more it meant that the scale of the next attack would be huge. In the eyes of the Black Cavalry, Yang Chendong was like a god. Since he said so, no one doubted him. Knowing that a big battle was imminent, all the soldiers began to clean their guns and reload, preparing for the battle that could erupt at any time. Soon, it was noon. Baiming's Liaodong cavalry still didn't move, but there were rumbling sounds of horses galloping on the ground not far away. As dust rose into the air, Deputy General Luo Baikuan finally brought the rest of the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry over. A total of 85,000 Baiming's Liaodong cavalry gathered together. Looking down from the mountain, it was a black mass. It was a spectacular sight. Are they finally here? Yang Chendong took the binoculars and looked down the mountain. After seeing everything clearly, a cold smile appeared on his face. He had a feeling that the enemy's charge would begin soon. At this moment, he couldn't help but sigh at how difficult Fang Dingshan was to deal with. Imagine, if they attacked in the afternoon, there was no need to talk about using it. But if they failed, they could use the night to retreat. That way, even if there was an ambush outside, it would be extremely difficult to catch them all. Before planning for victory, one had to think about defeat. This was a quality that a good general had to have. Come on, adjust the muzzles. Once the enemy attacks, immediately launch a blanket attack on the enemy camp. This time, we need to kill as many of the enemy's forces as possible, so that they won't be able to pose any threat for a while. Yang Chendong said as if he was preparing for a rainy day. If the enemy wanted to do something ruthless, why wouldn't he do the same? At that moment, the 3100mm mortars on the mountain were fully prepared. Other than that, a few flamethrowers and grenades were also taken out. The light and heavy machine guns were loaded with ammunition to ensure that once they opened fire, they would be able to continuously kill the enemy. Send a telegram to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Division of the new army, and the subordinate division to prepare to face the scattered enemy. Yang Chendong didn't forget about the cavalry army outside. This was enough to prove his confidence in the Black Cavalry. At the foot of the mountain, Luo Baikuan walked into the main tent in full armor and came in front of Fang Dingshan. Once he entered the tent, Luo Baikuan said anxiously, "General, is Bugnam of Gojoseon sure that he's on the mountain?" "Yes." Fang Dingshan nodded and answered with a very confident tone. Hearing this answer, Luo Baikuan smiled. He gave up the opportunity to completely annihilate the heavy cavalry regiment to come here. If Bugnam of Gojoseon wasn't on the mountain and there were only 2,000 black cavalry soldiers, he wouldn't be interested. But now, it was different. If he could kill Yang Chendong, it would definitely be a great achievement. No matter how many heavy cavalry regiments he annihilated, it would still be incomparable. "General, when are we going to attack?" Luo Baikuan didn't know the power of the firearms in the black cavalry soldiers' hands. At this moment, he was a little anxious. Perhaps he didn't even put the black cavalry in his eyes. After all, there were only 2,000 people. No matter how powerful they were, it was only 2,000 people. Against almost 100,000 elite Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry, what could they do? Seeing Luo Baikuan's confidence, Fang Dingshan wanted to come to the same conclusion. But when he thought of the big loss he suffered yesterday, he had to be realistic. They have firearms. Don't underestimate them. Firearms? When Luo Baikuan heard this, he still said disapprovingly, I've seen firearms before. Just like the 20,000 firearms camp that Gao Yu brought, it's just a so-so. We can take it down with one charge. There are only 2,000 enemies here. What can they do? We have the advantage in numbers. Victory is not a problem at all. Luo Baikuan's confident words were heard by Fang Dingshan, and he was very encouraged. Yes, we have the advantage in numbers. Even if the enemy's firearms are powerful, they can't kill us all. As long as we can rush to the top of the mountain, victory will be ours. Fang Dingshan, who had received encouragement, was grinning from ear to ear. Then, he called in the generals to make arrangements for the battle. At this moment, he seemed to be able to see the scene of Yang Chundong's head being chopped off and presented to the Daizong Emperor. Looking down from the bottom of the mountain, he could see the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry gathering their troops. Seeing more and more enemies getting on their horses, Yang Chundong put down his binoculars after he pulled out his sabers. Prepare to load the ammunition. Fire the cannons. Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry was ready to charge. Yang Chundong couldn't just let them do as they pleased. After all, the difference in numbers was too great. If he really waited for the enemy to charge in front of him before he opened fire, with the cavalry speed, the enemy would reach him in 300 meters. If that was the case, he would be in danger. He couldn't just sit there and wait for death. He had to strike first. He believed that since the enemy decided to charge, they wouldn't stop just because he made the first move. Chapter 1338. Once the order was given, the 30 mortars that had been prepared and calibrated were immediately loaded with ammunition. When Yang Chundong saw the 30 soldiers holding 30 cannonballs looking at him, he didn't hesitate and said, "Load and fire." Fire. With a loud shout, the 30 cannonballs were quickly swallowed by the cannon barrel. Then, there was a loud rumbling sound. The cannonballs drew a beautiful arc in the sky and fell towards the camp of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry. At this moment, the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry were still preparing. There were simply too many people. There had to be an arrangement as to who would attack first and who would follow suit. Otherwise, if they all rushed forward, there would be no space for them to display their skills. They might even end up crowding each other. Suddenly, there was a whistling sound in the sky. The Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry who were still preparing instinctively looked up. However, the speed of the cannonballs was too fast for them to catch sight of. When they raised their heads, they saw bursts of flames appearing beside them, followed by thunderous booms. Boom 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 boom. When the cannonballs landed, they landed right in the middle of the dense crowd. For a moment, a powerful shockwave blew over like a gale. The northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry were thrown off their horses like kites with their strings cut. Some of the warhorses were also frightened and began to flee in all directions while neighing incessantly. The warhorse, which had always been docile, no longer recognized its owner. In its shock, it ran around randomly, crashing into all directions. Who knew how many of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry were knocked to the ground and trampled by the horses' hooves? The cannonballs sounded and tents were overturned. Some even caused a sea of fire, giving people a feeling of purgatory. Don't panic, don't panic. Follow me and charge. Charge. Luo Baikuan saw the cannonballs falling and messing up the formation of the army. He was naturally furious. While he was shocked by the power of the Black Cavalry's cannonballs, he made a bold decision to charge immediately. Otherwise, who knew how messy the army would be if this continued and whether they would have the ability to counterattack. The roar of the cannonballs and explosions disrupted the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's formation, making them unable to gather on time and launch a large-scale charge. It also forced the enemy to attack as soon as possible. Calling it a decisive battle was a bit of an exaggeration. One side had 80,000 elite cavalry while the other side only had 2,000 black cavalry. The difference in numbers was too great. Calling it a decisive battle was a bit wrong because this was a one-sided massacre. It had nothing to do with a decisive battle. Calling it a decisive battle was inappropriate. There had never been a decisive battle where one side had lost soldiers and generals while the other side had no losses. Rather than calling it a decisive battle, it was more appropriate to call it a suicidal battle. The roar of the cannonballs continued. One cannonball after another landed in the camp of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Whether it was those who were about to charge, those who were preparing to charge, or those who were left behind, none of them were spared. This was because no one knew where the next cannonball would land and who it would kill. The sound of gunfire continued like the firecrackers set off by the rich during the New Year. There was no sign of it stopping. As the bullets were fired, the warhorses that were charging forward were hit one after another. The cavalrymen on the warhorses were hit one after another. They had no choice but to fall to the side with their horses. The sound of explosions continued. When the enemy was about 100 meters away from them, rocket launchers fired one after another, landing in the crowd, causing waves of explosions and screams of agony. If the enemy was a bit closer, the grenades would fall from the sky like raindrops falling from the sky. At the same time, they would create a huge blaze, and at the same time, they would also kill and injure the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. The 2,000 black cavalry on Qian Mountain divided up the work in an orderly manner. Some were firing cannonballs, some were shooting, and some were throwing grenades. They were all busy at this moment. Almost all of the 2,000 people were using it. No one stopped to rest. Everyone was very busy. Although it was very tiring, it was worth it. It was because this kind of battle was not something that could be encountered all the time. Fortunately, the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry had strict discipline and a clear goal. They wanted to kill Yang Chendong wholeheartedly. If it was another opponent, they would have been scared away. Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's losses continued to increase. More than half of 1,000 people would be lost before they reached the halfway point of the mountain. When they were only a few dozen meters away, not a single one would be left. The highest peak of Qian Mountain seemed to have become a natural moat. A huge gap completely separated the two sides. Even if you had the power to split the sky, you would still not be able to take a step forward. Charge, continue to charge. Don't be afraid of death. They only have 2,000 cavalry. Luo Baikuan had already stopped his warhorse. He brought some of his soldiers to hide behind a few big trees. They used the branches to hide themselves. The losses were so great that Luo Baikuan's heart was bleeding at every moment. However, he could no longer shout for them to stop. After fighting for so long, if they stopped, then all of their previous efforts would be wasted. He wanted to see how much gunpowder the enemy had. He did not believe that his 80,000 cavalry would not be able to exhaust the enemy's gunpowder. As long as the enemy's firearms could not be used, he believed that the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's spit could take Bugnam of Gojoseon's life. The Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry continued to charge. Although many people saw the power of the firearms, they could only continue to charge since their superiors did not give the order to retreat or stop attacking. This was especially true when some of their fellow soldiers had died right beside them, which made them feel deeply stimulated. At this moment, they were like mad bulls. They only knew to keep moving forward. They only had one goal, which was to rush to the top of the mountain and kill the Black Knight Dragon Guards. The charge was still going on. At a certain camp at the foot of the mountain, Fang Dingshan was already vomiting blood from the heartache. The Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry was an elite cavalry unit that he had painstakingly built. In an environment where Baiming lacked warhorses, it was easy to imagine how difficult it was to form a cavalry unit with 100,000 people. For this reason, the Daizong Emperor did not hesitate to take out money from the state treasury from various ministers and the Northern Ming Bank to make up for the shortfall, giving him sufficient support in the hopes that he would be able to raise the army and restore the glory of the Northern Ming army. In this army that even the emperor had invested a lot of money into, Fang Dingshan had put in a lot of effort. He did not fear the dangers of the journey and came to Liaodong. With his silver tongue and large amounts of money, he persuaded many strong young men to join the army. He also went to the prison and saved some Mongolian prisoners and sent them to the army. He also found many merchants who often went to the grasslands and used a high price to buy Mongolian men who were skilled in horse riding. He also walked through many Baiming army units and picked out many strong soldiers to fill the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. It could be said that the internal structure of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry was very complicated. It took a lot of effort for each person to join. Fortunately, the results were satisfactory. Even the famous heavy cavalry unit of the 5-star army was no match for them. This gave Fang Dingshan hope and a future. This was also the reason why he dared to bring the army here even though he knew that Yang Chindong had appeared and was already prepared. He firmly believed that no matter how strong the opponent was, he still had a great advantage against nearly 100,000 cavalry with only 2,000 men. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. At this time, Fang Dingshan was trapped in this argument. Seeing elite cavalrymen charging out one after another, only to quickly fall on the path of the charge. Their sabers were not stained with blood, and their strength had not been fully displayed, they were already dead. That kind of feeling made his heart ache and palpitate. What kind of brain did Bugnam of Gojoseon have to create so many powerful firearms? Just what kind of person was Wu Nan Wang to be able to create such a battle formation with the few against the many? What kind of courage did Bugnam of Gojoseon have to face 100,000 with 2,000 men and not be afraid? Instead, he was filled with killing intent. At this moment, Fang Dingshan hated Yang Chindong to the core. If cursing could kill someone, then even 1,000 lives would not be enough for Bugnam of Gojoseon. His eyes were red, his heart was bleeding, and blood was flowing out of the corner of his mouth because of the heartache. Gradually, Fang Dingshan, who was always calm and composed and never moved in the slightest, became more and more unsightly. His mental endurance had reached its limit, and he was about to collapse. "General, should we retreat?" Mu Qiong was standing guard beside Fang Dingshan. He watched as countless cavalrymen charged forward, but soon there was no news of them. The lively young lad had turned into a corpse that could not move at all. How could his heart not bleed? Before he knew how much gunpowder Bugnam of Gojoseon had prepared, he thought that such a reckless charge would not solve anything, so he thought of persuading them to stop. Fang Dingshan's face showed a hint of hesitation and struggle, but he quickly shook his head. "No, we can't stop." Indeed, they could not stop. If this could not take down Yang Chindong, Fang Dingshan did not know when he would have the chance to kill this person. As long as Yang Chindong did not die, Baiming would be in danger, and it was not impossible for the country to be destroyed. Therefore, no matter how high the price he had to pay, Fang Dingshan could not retreat, and he could not hesitate. He wanted to pay with lives today. He wanted to see how long the 5-star army could last. Did they not know how tiring it was to kill people? Baiming's Liaodong cavalry did not show any signs of stopping, and the gunshots on Qian Mountain did not stop either. However, If one listened carefully, the gunshots were not as intense as before. Chapter 1339. On the top of the mountain, the heavy machine guns had already become scalding hot due to overheating. Some light machine guns also had the same problem. Fortunately, there was enough water on the mountain. At this moment, buckets of water were poured under the guns, igniting a large amount of steam. Stop the light and light machine guns appropriately and use them after cooling down. All the people who have retreated, go get grenades and blow up these enemies. Yang Qindong's voice replaced Beta Persei's. In a war that had never been organized with such intensity, Beta Persei's commanding ability obviously still needed to be improved. Fortunately, Yang Qindong in his previous life had seen all kinds of storms and waves, so he quickly replaced the commanding position. Under his command, the 2,000 black cavalry did their own things in an orderly manner and dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. Beta Persei was still learning seriously from the side. However, he didn't know if there would be another chance to command like this. After all, not every enemy was as brave, fearless, and disciplined as Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. Countless grenades were thrown down the mountain. After a series of explosions and smoke, another batch of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry fell on the charging road. Yang Qindong took this opportunity to wipe the sweat on his forehead. At this moment, he had to admit that Baiming's Liaodong cavalry's bravery was beyond his expectations. If it wasn't for his ample preparation, he was afraid that the enemy might have really rushed up. If that was the case, with only the 2,000 black cavalry, he could only rely on Dutsong to rush out. That was his trump card, and he wouldn't use it easily. Otherwise, some things wouldn't be easy to explain. The bravery of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry was beyond Yang Qindong's expectations, but how could it not be a happy thing? The fiercer the other party charged now, the greater the losses would be, and the less of a threat they might pose to him in the future. It was even possible to wipe them all out here. That way, the threat of Baiming would be greatly reduced, and the entire 5-star army would be able to spare more energy and manpower to do what they wanted to do. The sound of gunfire was still going on. 4 hours later, the sky outside was completely dark. The only thing that could be seen on the battlefield was the muzzle flashes that constantly spewed out bullets, as well as the flares that were fired into the air from time to time. Every time the flare lit up, gunshots would ring out. Groups of northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong iron cavalry would fall down like sand blown by the wind. This scene was clearly seen by everyone under the illumination of the flares. As more and more of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry became corpses, the morale of the army began to waver. No one in the world was willing to die. As long as there was a bit of hope to live, they wouldn't take the initiative to seek death. The previous attack was completely due to the strict discipline of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry, and the fact that the target was only 2,000 people, which gave countless people hope. But now, seeing that the 5-star army's gunfire didn't seem to stop, and even the heavy and light machine guns that had stopped firing were starting to ring out again, some of the soldiers who thought that the 5-star army didn't have enough gunpowder finally began to feel disappointed. There was no chance of victory at all, and they were only using human lives to fill the gap. When would this kind of battle end? If the 80,000 cavalry were all here, but the other party still had gunpowder, what would they do? Wouldn't that mean that everyone had died here for nothing? Everyone had their own selfish motives, especially on a battlefield where there was no chance of victory. Some people couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. The first to make a move were the Mongolian grassland men that Fong Dingshan had spent a lot of money to invite from the merchants. They were like mercenaries, and they came here for money. As long as someone paid them, they would give their lives. Even if they died in battle, they wouldn't regret it. But even if they knew that they would die, they still wanted to charge. That wasn't something a greedy person would do. Even if they had money, they had to be alive to spend it. When they saw that the 5-star army was still full of firepower, these people were shaken. Then, some self-proclaimed smart people began to flee under the cover of the night when no one was watching them. When the first person retreated, the people around him quickly followed suit. Soon, more and more cavalrymen began to disregard the military order and retreat. Their retreat was like a domino effect, causing more and more cavalrymen to retreat. Humans were social animals. What they would do the most was follow suit. When they saw that the people around them had begun to retreat, it was their nature to retreat as well. As for the so-called consequences, that was a matter for the future. As a result, on the battlefield, in the dark, more and more Baiming Liaodong cavalry started to retreat. It was like a plague that spread to everyone. Many cavalry who didn't know what was going on thought that it was an order from the general and also retreated. Luo Baikuan, who was hiding under the cover of the trees, quickly realized that something was wrong. He knew that the thing he was most worried about had happened. In order to obtain the final victory, there was no time for him to think. He rushed out from his hiding place and shouted, "Everyone, listen to my order. Continue to charge. Charge. Those who retreat will die." After shouting this, Luo Baikuan rode his warhorse into the battlefield and slashed at the head of a Mongolian soldier who was retreating. Swoosh! With one slash, a head rolled to the ground. At this time, Luo Baikuan was like a killing god. He ignored the blood splattered on his body as he shouted loudly, "This general is here. Those who retreat will be killed." Luo Baikuan used his actions to show everyone what battlefield discipline was. This action also frightened many of the surrounding cavalrymen. The soldiers who originally wanted to retreat had no choice but to stop what they were doing. Phew! Seeing that the army had temporarily stabilized, Luo Baikuan let out a sigh of relief. In order to increase the victory, he shouted, "They only have 2,000 people. They can't have so much gunpowder. As long as we persevere, victory will be ours." He was still cheering his subordinates on, encouraging them to continue to charge. It could also be said that he was encouraging them to die. Suddenly, a flare lit up in the sky and lit up the mountainside like it was daytime. With the help of the flare, the black cavalry at the top of the mountain saw everything. When they saw a small number of Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen, Ba Daojiang, who was in charge of artillery support, laughed. "Come on, charge to the mountainside and open fire." When the flare lit up, Luo Baikuan, who was riding on his horse, had a bad feeling. However, he didn't retreat immediately because he knew that many soldiers were looking at him. If he were to hide like this, the morale of the army would definitely be greatly affected. He was afraid that the army would really be routed. With a fluke mentality, Luo Baikuan continued to shout to the soldiers gathered around him, "There is no one in this world that can't be killed. We have a strong advantage in numbers. As long as everyone works together, victory will definitely belong to us. As long as we can kill Bugnam of Gojoseon, we will all be heroes. The great Ming Dynasty will remember us and we will be conferred the title of Marquis." Chirp, boom. Just as Luo Baikuan was encouraging the morale of the army, suddenly, dozens of cannonballs fell from the sky and covered their area. Coincidentally, one of the cannonballs landed 3 meters away from Luo Baikuan. Following a loud bang, an indescribable wave of air enveloped Luo Baikuan. Luo Baikuan, who was still thinking of saying something on his warhorse, felt his chest tighten. Then, he was separated from his warhorse and flew into the air. Luo Baikuan, who was flying in the air, still had his mouth open. However, because his internal organs were severely injured, he could no longer utter a single word. As he opened and closed his mouth, streams of dark red blood flowed out. Luo Baikuan was actually blown away. One could imagine that the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen who had recovered some of their morale could not take it anymore. Their general was dead, so why were they still guarding here? Even if they were to charge, who would they charge for? Run! No one knew who shouted so loudly, but the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen began to collapse. This move quickly became a trend that no one could stop. Fang Dingshan, who was waiting for the news of victory, suddenly saw countless black figures retreating from the foot of the mountain. His eyes could not help but widen. He knew that the result he was most afraid of had happened. Before this, Fang Dingshan had already made up his mind. As long as the soldiers did not retreat, he would not retreat. Even if he had to sacrifice all of the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen, as long as he could kill Yang Chendong, everything would be worth it. But now, the army suddenly retreated. He did not give such a military order, so there was only one result. The army's morale and momentum were gone. This was the only result. It's over, it's over. Tears fell from the corner of Fang Dingshan's eyes. He knew that the situation was over. At this time, even if he stood out and wanted to boost the army's morale, it was obviously impossible. Dispersing was dispersing. It was not something that anyone could gather in a short period of time. Fang Dingshan, who said that it was over, did not manage to catch his breath and immediately fainted. If Mu Qiong hadn't reacted quickly enough and caught him, he would have been seriously injured from the fall. Mu Qiong did not understand why the general suddenly fainted. Just as he was panicking, a fast horse came in front of him. Reporting, General Luo Baikuan has died in battle. The army has begun to retreat. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.